The first thing Lady Honora Fenwick saw was her mother's sewing chest being carried toward the auction table. Lot 37, the auctioneer called from below. A walnut sewing chest with brass corners, assorted threads, bone implements, and minor personal effects. The words struck harder than the hammer in his hand. Honora gripped the upper landing rail and stared down into Brackenmere Hall, where red inventory labels hung from chairs, portraits, cabinets, and even the cracked marble bust near the staircase. Creditors stood in damp coats beneath the chandelier. Neighbors watched with the alert silence of people relieved that disgrace had chosen another house. Servants remained near the walls, their faces lowered. Rain tapped against the tall windows. Somewhere behind Honora, a woman whispered, "She's awake." Awake was not the correct word. Honora knew this hall. She knew the faded green runner beneath her feet and the stain on the ceiling above the west arch. She knew the auctioneer would sell the silver, the Northfield, the remaining horses, and anything Lord Ambrose Fenwick had not already pledged. She also knew that Lady Honora Fenwick was supposed to become desperate, cruel, and publicly ruined before dying in a debtor's prison. The knowledge arrived in broken images rather than explanation. A London supper. Lady Lavinia Stroud in a green gown, standing rigid while Honora laughed. A letter filled with threats. Ambrose pressing papers beneath her hand. Iron bars. Cold bread. No one coming. Honora drew one slow breath. The body she inhabited felt weak from sleeplessness, but the humiliation in the hall belonged to someone who had endured far more than one bad morning. The porter carrying the sewing chest reached the table. Honora moved. Stop. Her voice did not carry far enough. The auctioneer lifted the hammer. Do I have £3? I said stop. This time the hall heard her. Faces turned upward. A few people smiled. They expected spectacle from Lady Honora. The original woman had trained them to. Honora descended the staircase without rushing, though every step made the room tilt. The bailiff met her at the bottom. My lady, the sale is lawfully authorized. By whom? Lord Ambrose Fenwick, acting for the estate creditors. That chest belonged to Lady Margaret Fenwick. Everything within Brackenmere is listed. Then your list is wrong. A murmur moved through the room. The bailiff's expression tightened. You signed no objection before the sale. Honora looked at the red label tied to the brass handle. The ink had blurred where rainwater or careless fingers had touched it. For one terrible instant, another memory opened. Lady Margaret, sitting by a fire, turning a pale bone hook between her fingers, while a younger Honora complained that such work was beneath them. Her mother had said nothing. That silence now felt heavier than rebuke. Remove the label, Honora said. I cannot. Then suspend the lot. I cannot. You mean you will not? I mean the estate is under lawful distress. The auctioneer cleared his throat. My lady, delaying the sale will reduce confidence among buyers. That is not among my present griefs. A man near the windows gave a quiet laugh, not mocking. Interested, Honora turned. He stood apart from the local gentleman, tall, dark-haired, and composed in a rain-damp coat, cut too well to belong to anyone without rank or money. His gaze moved from her to the sewing chest, then to the inventory sheet in the bailiff's hand. He looked less like a rescuer than a man who had discovered arithmetic behaving dishonestly. The bailiff saw him and straightened. Your Grace. The room shifted at once. Backs stiffened, hats lowered. Honora knew the name before anyone spoke it. Sebastian Harcourt, Duke of Caldemere. In the original story, he had disliked Lady Honora, distrusted every word she spoke, and eventually testified that her conduct made her unfit for sympathy. That had been before debtor's prison, before the final chapter, before Honora had awakened inside the woman he condemned. Sebastian approached the table. "May I see the inventory?" The bailiff handed it over. "The chest is included under movable household property." Sebastian read the page. The notation says, "Personal effects of the late Lady Margaret." Still within the estate? Not necessarily. He turned one sheet back. Was Lady Margaret's marriage settlement examined? The bailiff hesitated. Lord Ambrose assured us all relevant property had reverted. Lord Ambrose's assurances are not deeds. A few buyers looked toward the doors as though fearing the sale might dissolve before they acquired anything cheaply. Sir Sebastian continued in the same mild voice. If the chest formed part of Lady Margaret's separate property, its contents may have passed by personal bequest rather than through the estate. Selling it before review would be inconvenient. "For whom?" the auctioneer asked. "For everyone who prefers not to buy disputed goods." The hammer lowered. Honora did not thank him, not yet. Sebastian had not acted for her. He had acted for correct procedure. Strangely, that made the relief cleaner. "How long will the review take?" she asked. His eyes settled on her face. They were grey, steady, and without softness. 1 day for the chest, longer for the full inventory. The sale cannot continue around disputed property. No. He glanced over the red labels, and judging by the quality of the records, the dispute may not be limited to one object. The bailiff protested. Sebastian ignored him. "Suspend the auction until the papers are examined." "Your Grace, the creditors will object." "Then they may object in writing, where their claims can be read before being obeyed." The hammer did not fall. One by one, the buyers began to withdraw from the center of the hall. The auctioneer covered his papers with visible resentment. Honora remained beside the chest while Mrs. Blythe, Brackenmere's housekeeper, came forward to unlock it. The hinges gave a small sigh. Inside lay spools of thread, folded linen, yellowed patterns, a silver thimble, and 3 crochet hooks. Honora's gaze went immediately to the palest one, bone, smooth with use, engraved near the handle with 2 faint letters, H.F. Lady Margaret's married initials. Beside it rested a small velvet case containing an emerald clasp and a pair of pearl earrings. The bailiff pointed. If one item is allowed for immediate personal retention, the jewels have the clearest value. Then they should remain for review. Honora picked up the hook. It was warmer than she expected, as though her mother's hand had only just released it. Sebastian watched without comment. "You choose that?" the bailiff asked. "Yes, over the emerald. The emerald has never earned anyone a meal." She turned the hook between her fingers. A length of faded thread had caught beneath the lining. When she drew it free, something hard struck the bottom of the chest. Mrs. Blythe reached beneath the folded linen and lifted a tarnished brass disc. It was stamped with the letters NYR and the number 417. Sebastian's attention sharpened. "Where did that come from?" "It was under the lining," Honora said. "Do you know it?" He held out his hand but waited. Honora placed the disc in his palm. "North Yorkshire Railway," he said. "Route 417. A freight route, formerly. It passed the old Brackenmere siding before it was discontinued 6 years ago." He examined the worn edge. A shallow crescent had been chipped from one side. "This is a consignment seal. It should have been returned or destroyed when the route closed." "Why would my mother keep it?" Sebastian looked at the chest, then at her. "That is the more useful question." Mrs. Blythe made a small sound. Honora turned. The housekeeper had taken up one of the yellowed crochet patterns. Faint pencil marks ran along the border, numbers written between repeated arches. Her ladyship used to count shipments this way, Mrs. Blythe said. She said figures looked less dangerous when men thought they were lace. Honora took the pattern. Beneath the last row of instructions, Lady Margaret had written a single line in a trembling hand. Wait before departure. Wait again at York. The hall seemed to grow quieter around her. What was she sending? Sebastian asked. Mrs. Blythe looked toward the servants before answering. Work, collars, cuffs, mourning trim, things made by women Lord Ambrose didn't know she employed. Why hide them? Honora asked. Mrs. Blythe's eyes met hers. Because he called wages wasteful when women earned them. Honora closed her fingers around the bone hook. Somewhere between Brackenmere and York, sealed crates had arrived lighter than they left. Her mother had hidden the evidence inside crochet patterns and a sewing chest. Above them, the auction labels still marked everything strangers intended to take. Sebastian returned the brass seal to Honora. The sale will remain suspended for 10 days while the inventory and settlement papers are reviewed. 10 days, she repeated. It is not long. It is longer than an afternoon. His gaze moved to the pattern in her hand. What you do with it may matter more. Honora looked across Brackenmere Hall at the red labels, the lowered faces, and the table where her mother's chest had nearly been sold for £3. 10 days would not save the estate. It would not repair her name. It would not undo the cruelty of the woman whose memories now lived inside her. But the hook in her hand had once turned thread into wages, and the seal had survived because Lady Margaret believed a missing weight could expose a theft. Honora lifted her head. Mrs. Blythe, find every pattern Lady Margaret left. The housekeeper nodded. And every woman she paid. Sebastian's expression changed by the smallest degree. Not trust. Not yet. Attention. Honora looked at the unfinished pattern again. Her mother had hidden numbers inside lace because no one powerful thought women's work worth reading. That mistake had lasted 6 years. It would not last 10 more days. By 7 the next morning, the estate office smelled of cold ashes, damp paper, and old neglect. Agnes Reed had opened every ledger she could find and arranged them across the desk in careful rows. Honora stood beside the window with Lady Margaret's unfinished crochet pattern in one hand and the bone hook in the other. Outside, workmen removed the auction platform from the hall, but left the red labels hanging from the furniture. Their presence in the adjoining rooms made every page feel temporary. The West tenants paid in full last quarter, Agnes said. The repair fund should contain nearly £200, and it does not. No, Agnes turned another page. The same is true of the wool accounts. The estate sold fine fleece to Mr. Pell of York at nearly half the usual price. Who approved it? Lord Ambrose. Honora looked at the entry. The signature was bold and careless. A second notation showed freight charges paid through York, though the goods had supposedly been collected directly from Brackenmere. Why pay railway handling on wool removed by cart? She asked. Agnes followed the line with one finger. There is no reason, unless it travelled farther than the books admit. She placed Lady Margaret's pattern beside the ledger. The penciled numbers between the crochet arches matched no household quantities, but 3 corresponded closely to wool weights recorded 6 years earlier: 112, 98, 87. These were shipments, Honora said. And the amounts beside them? Agnes compared the pattern with another page. Shortages, not random ones. Honora traced the difference. always enough to reduce what remained, but never enough to stop the shipment entirely. Agnes looked toward the office door. Lady Margaret suspected theft, and hid the figures where Ambrose would not read them. A bitter memory passed through Honora without warning. Lady Margaret seated near a window, quietly counting skeins. A younger Honora stood before the mirror in a blue silk gown, saying that no respectable woman should smell of wool. Ambrose had laughed. Lady Margaret had folded the pattern and said nothing. The memory ended there, leaving shame behind like soot. Honora set the hook down carefully. What else did I refuse to see? Agnes did not pretend to misunderstand. My lady, before yesterday. Agnes's expression became guarded. She had served Lady Margaret as governess, then remained at Brackenmere as an unpaid companion when the household began to fail. She knew too much to answer comfortably. You disliked anything that reminded you the estate was poor, she said at last. And I punished people for reminding me. Sometimes. The restraint in that word hurt more than accusation. Honora crossed to the locked writing desk. Mrs. Blythe had found the key before dawn. Inside lay invitations, unpaid dressmaker bills, and a packet of letters tied with green ribbon. The top sheet bore Lavinia Stroud's name. Honora opened it. The first pages were written in the elegant, vicious hand she now recognized as her own. They accused Lavinia of manipulating a gentleman already promised elsewhere. They threatened to expose private conversations at a London supper. The final page had not been signed. It promised that if Lavinia did not withdraw from society, Honora would make certain no respectable house received her. Agnes watched from the desk. Was it sent? Honora asked. Not that page. The earlier accusations were spoken publicly. Another memory surfaced. Lavinia standing motionless beneath a chandelier while several women pretended not to listen. Honora's own voice, bright with cruelty. Ambrose near the doorway, smiling as though discord were entertainment arranged for him. Why did he encourage it? Honora whispered. Because while you were occupied with Lady Lavinia, you did not question the accounts. Agnes's answer came gently, which made it worse. Honora folded the unsigned page once, then tore it across. She placed the pieces in the grate and touched a candle flame to them. The paper darkened, curled, and disappeared. The remaining letters stayed on the desk. Agnes raised her brows. You are keeping them? If Ambrose used my anger to hide his dealings, the letters may show when and how. And the carriage ordered for London? Cancel it. You intended to leave tomorrow. That woman intended to leave tomorrow. Honora looked at the ash settling in the grate. I will not spend the next 10 days chasing Lavinia through drawing rooms while Brackenmere is dismantled behind me. By noon, Mrs. Blythe had found 6 of Lady Margaret's former workers. They gathered in the abandoned morning room, where sunlight fell through dusty panes onto covered furniture. Their dresses were plain, their hands work-worn. None curtsied deeply. Martha Keene stood nearest the mantel, broad-shouldered and watchful. Beside her sat Mrs. Pritchard, an older widow whose fingers were swollen at the joints. The other women kept their baskets closed. Honora entered with Agnes, carrying the wage ledger and a bundle of cream wool. Silence greeted her. Martha spoke first. Mrs. Blythe said you wanted the women your mother employed. I do. For what? Paid work. One woman gave a short, disbelieving laugh. Martha did not. Your mother paid. You called it beggar's lace. The memory did not come, but Honora believed her. Then I was wrong. You said my sister's hands were too rough to touch anything worn by a lady. Was she here? She died last winter. Honora felt every prepared sentence become useless. I am sorry. Martha's face remained hard. Sorry doesn't buy coal, no. Honora looked at each woman in turn. Nor does it return the respect I took from her. I will not ask you to forgive me. I am asking whether you will judge the terms I offer now. Agnes opened the ledger. Honora placed the wool on the table and showed them a narrow crochet edging, worked from Lady Margaret's pattern. York mourning shops pay well for fine collars and cuffs when the structure is even. We have wool, patterns, and 10 days before the auction can resume. I propose payment by accepted piece. Correction time will also be paid. Yarn will be weighed when issued and again when returned. No deduction will be made for work rejected because the yarn itself is unfit. Martha studied the sample. Who decides whether a piece is accepted? At first, you, Agnes, and I, together. And when you disagree, the reason will be written beside the piece. Mrs. Pritchard touched the edging. This stitch turns too sharply for weak fingers. Then we alter the handle or divide the work. You speak as though there will be enough orders to divide. There are none yet. Honora did not soften the truth. There are only samples and a chance. The younger women exchanged glances. Martha folded her arms. And wages? Honora removed the emerald clasp from her dress. The stone caught the light with the rich green of a life built for appearances. In another memory, original Honora had worn it while humiliating Lavinia. This will be sold in York today, she said. The money will cover training pieces and the first approved work. Jewels before creditors? Agnes asked quietly. This one is mine beyond dispute. Honora set it beside the ledger, and it has cost enough already. Martha picked up the sample collar. Show me the turning row. Honora sat at the table and took up the bone hook. Her first movements were clumsy, but the body remembered what the mind did not. Thread looped, tightened, and settled into pattern. Mrs. Pritchard corrected her grip. Martha changed the spacing. Within an hour, baskets opened. Wool moved from hand to hand. Agnes recorded names and rates. Trust did not enter the room, but work did. By evening, 6 sample collars lay across the table. Honora checked each one with Martha and marked 2 for correction. No one was dismissed. The corrected time went into the ledger. What do we call it? Agnes asked as she addressed the parcel for York. Honora looked at the narrow purple thistle embroidered on Lady Margaret's old pattern case. Thistle and thread. Martha's mouth shifted. Pretty. Useful, Honora said. A thistle survives poor ground. The parcel left before dusk. The reply returned the following afternoon. The York haberdasher praised the workmanship and requested prices for a larger order. But there was a condition. He required high-grade cream yarn, evenly spun and suitable for morning wear. Agnes read the final lines aloud. The principal suppliers in York and Leeds have entered an exclusive purchasing arrangement for the season. The agreement was financed through Lady Lavinia Stroud's charitable committee. The room went still. Martha looked toward Honora. She's closed the market. Not all of it, Honora said. Only the doors she knows. Agnes set down the letter. Fine yarn cannot be made from determination. Honora picked up Lady Margaret's pattern and turned to the coded weights. Somewhere between Brackenmere and York, her mother had found both workers and roots. Ambrose did not understand. Lavinia had money, influence, and contracts. Honora had 10 days, 6 women who did not trust her, a bone hook, and evidence that overlooked work could travel beneath the notice of powerful people. She folded the haberdasher's letter. Find every spinner outside Lavinia's agreement, she said, and every route her agents no longer bother to watch. By 8 the next morning, 3 names had been crossed from Agnes's list of possible spinners. 2 had refused to answer, and 1 had sent back a note so polite it might as well have been a locked door. Honora stood in the estate office with the rejected letters spread before her and the old railway pattern beside them. Outside, the yard was already loud with carts, sheep and men arguing over what still belonged to Brackenmere. The West Riding Mill near Bradford is the only one not tied to Lady Lavinia's arrangement, Agnes said. Its proprietor, Mr. Gresham, will sell to us if he is paid before dispatch. How much? Agnes named the sum. Honora looked at the remaining money from the emerald clasp. It would cover the yarn and almost nothing else. Right that we accept. Without freight, we will solve freight after we possess something worth moving. The office door opened before Agnes could reply. Sebastian entered with a solicitor carrying a leather case and a secretary who remained near the threshold. His coat was dry this time, his expression unreadable. "Lady Honora," he said, "you appear to have declared war on paper. Paper began it." His gaze moved over the lists, freight marks, and samples. "And is it losing?" "Too early to tell." The solicitor opened the mortgage records on a side table. Sebastian approached the main desk, but stopped before touching anything. "May I?" Honora nodded. He picked up the spinner's letter and read it. "Gresham is reliable. Then Lavinia has not frightened everyone. Not everyone can afford to be frightened by the same woman. You know him? I know his accounts. He once refused a favorable contract because the buyer insisted on controlling his suppliers. A sensible man, an inconvenient one. I tend to admire those." Honora met his gaze. "That must make London exhausting." The corner of his mouth shifted. Before he could answer, shouting broke out in the yard. Agnes reached the window first. 2 carts stood near the north sheds. Men were loading washed fleece beneath the direction of the same bailiff who had tried to continue the auction. Honora was already moving. "What authority does he have now?" Sebastian asked. "That is what I intend to discover." She crossed the passage and stepped into the cold yard. The men slowed when they saw her, but did not stop. The bailiff held up a folded paper. "Inspection and valuation under Lord Ambrose's instruction. Inspection does not require loading. The wool is to be removed for secure storage." "Where?" "York. Under whose account?" "That is not your concern." Honora walked to the nearest cart and placed one hand on the bale. "Everything leaving this yard is my concern until a court says otherwise." The bailiff glanced toward Sebastian, who had followed at a measured pace. "Your Grace, I assume you will explain the legal position." "Gladly." Sebastian held out his hand. "The paper." The bailiff surrendered it. Sebastian read the first page, then the second. "This authorizes inspection of goods connected to the disputed mortgage." "Yes, it does not authorize removal. The intent is clear." Intent is often the first refuge of men who dislike the wording. They signed. A few workers looked down to hide smiles. The bailiff stiffened. "Lord Ambrose holds the creditor's confidence." "Confidence is not carriage authority." Sebastian returned the paper. "Unload the carts." The command carried rank, but Honora did not allow the moment to become his victory. "Agnes, bring the wool ledger. Martha, choose 2 women to witness the weighing. Every bale comes off, is weighed, and is marked with the result before it returns to the shed." Martha, who had come from the morning room with her apron, still dusted in fibers, stepped forward at once. "And the men who loaded it? They are paid for the work already done," Honora said. "They were obeying instructions." The bailiff frowned. "You cannot spend estate money without approval." Then send the invoice to the man who gave the unlawful order. Sebastian looked at Honora, and for the first time his reserve gave way to something close to approval. The bales came down one by one. Agnes recorded each weight. Martha checked the markings. Honora stood beside the scale until the last bundle returned to the shed. Only then did she notice that her right hand had begun to tremble. She closed it around the edge of the ledger. Sebastian saw. He did not mention it. Instead, he shifted half a step, placing himself between her and the cluster of curious buyers who had gathered near the gate. "The yard has had enough entertainment," he said to them. "You may all return to whatever honest work has suffered from your absence." They dispersed, some reluctantly. Honora kept her eyes on the ledger. "You did not need to dismiss them." "No. Then why did you?" "Because they were watching you as though fear were evidence of weakness." She looked at him. "It is not. Only if it decides for you." The answer settled between them. She had no reply ready, which irritated her. Sebastian glanced toward the north sheds. "You handled the removal properly. You stopped it. I confirmed the paper. You preserved the wool. A distinction, an important one." Honora closed the ledger. "If I need your title every time someone tries to take something, I do not own a business. I own a succession of favors. Then use my title only where the law has made stupidity difficult to remove by ordinary means. That sounds suspiciously like advice. I am capable of worse." Back in the estate office, Agnes placed the brass NYR 417 seal beside the old timetable. Sebastian examined it only after Honora gave permission. He turned it under the light and traced the chipped crescent along the edge. "North Yorkshire Railway, Route 417, he said. The branch ran freight from the Brackenmere siding to York, then joined the Bradford line. Lady Margaret recorded weights before departure and again at York." Honora showed him the coded pattern. Some shipments arrived short. Sebastian studied the numbers, repeatedly, enough to hide the loss in ordinary handling. Then whoever did it understood how much could vanish without stopping delivery. Agnes laid out 3 old account pages. The shortages are small in each consignment, but together they equal nearly 2 months of wages. Sebastian's expression changed. The humor disappeared. Was Ambrose managing freight at the time? "He approved the accounts," Honora said. "That is not proof." "No." She looked at the seal. "It is a direction." Sebastian placed the brass disc near the timetable. The original die should have been destroyed when the route closed. If someone kept it, a crate could be opened and sealed again with the same mark. "Would the wax not show tampering?" Agnes asked. "Not if the string were replaced and the same die used carefully." Honora thought of Lady Margaret hiding figures inside lace because men did not read women's work. Then the seal was not proof the crate remained closed. It was proof someone wanted it to look closed. A messenger arrived before noon carrying 2 letters. The first came from Bradford. Mr. Gresham would sell the yarn at the quoted price if payment was received within 2 days. Collection had to occur within 3. The second came from York. The haberdasher had sold all 6 samples and now wanted 40 mourning collars, delivered within 14 days. Agnes read the quantity twice. 40. Martha, standing near the work table, looked toward the women in the morning room beyond. "With 6 workers? There will be more," Honora said, "if there is yarn." Sebastian took the York letter and checked the price. "The order is sound. You sound surprised." "I am trying not to insult you by pretending I expected it. Your restraint is admirable. Painful, but admirable." Agnes began calculating wages, yarn, and transport. Her pencil moved faster, then stopped. The yarn uses nearly all the advance from the clasp. We cannot afford direct carriage from Bradford. What about rail? Honora asked. The current route does not stop at Brackenmere. Sebastian looked at the old timetable, but the Bradford goods wagon still passes within 2 miles of the abandoned junction every Thursday. Tomorrow, Honora said. It will not stop without permission? No, he replied, but York merchants receive freight from that wagon. If your haberdasher accepts the yarn at York, a return cart could bring it here. Honora turned to Agnes. Write to him. Offer first choice of the next mourning design at wholesale. You intend to make him our freight agent? Sebastian asked. Temporarily, without surrendering ownership. You are learning. A third note arrived before sunset. It carried no signature, only a report from a spinner's clerk who had once worked for Lady Margaret. Lavinia's purchasing agent was offering double the usual commission to any supplier who refused Brackenmere. Honora read the message aloud. Martha swore softly beneath her breath. Agnes looked at the 40-collar order. She means to starve us before we begin. Honora spread the old routes schedule beside the current freight map. The abandoned line crossed a new one west of the estate. Lady Margaret had used the old route to send work no one thought worth watching. The same indifference might still be useful. Find every surviving schedule for Route 417, Honora said, and every clerk who served it before it closed. Sebastian studied her across the table. You believe the old line still has something to offer? Honora placed the bone hook over Lady Margaret's penciled weights. Not the line, she said. The people who remember where it led. The yarn reached York on Thursday afternoon, with 12 minutes to spare before the goods office closed. Mr. Gresham's men had loaded it in Bradford before dawn, and the haberdasher's clerk signed for the bales under protest, as though becoming part of Lady Honora Fenwick's freight arrangement might damage his reputation. By sunset, his return cart was climbing the road toward Brackenmere with 86 pounds of fine cream yarn under canvas. Honora waited in the yard with Agnes, Martha, and 2 borrowed scales. Sebastian stood beneath the archway, having arrived on the excuse of reviewing the mortgage papers, and remained because no one believed that excuse anymore. The wagon is late, Agnes said. The road from York is mud. Mud has no respect for commercial urgency, Sebastian observed. A character flaw common to roads and creditors. Honora watched the bend beyond the gate. The haberdasher agreed to the arrangement. That is what matters. He also demanded first choice of your next mourning design. At wholesale, you have converted a reluctant shopkeeper into a freight partner, temporarily. I begin to suspect that is how empires are born. The cart appeared before Honora could answer. Its wheels sank deep into the wet ruts. Martha directed the driver beneath the covered passage, and the first bale was lowered onto the scale. Agnes read the Bradford dispatch weight from the invoice, 22 pounds. The needle stopped at 20. No one spoke. Honora checked the rope, then the canvas. The supplier's seal remained intact. Again, she said. They reset the scale and weighed it a second time. 20 pounds. Sebastian moved closer, but did not touch the bale. Moisture loss would not account for 2 pounds in one day. Nor would ordinary handling, Martha said. Honora marked the shortage in Agnes's ledger. Set this one aside. We use the others first. The driver looked uneasy. My lady, I only collected what the York clerk gave me. Then your name will appear as carrier, not culprit. She signed his receipt for the weight actually delivered. You will still be paid in full. Relief passed over his face. Sebastian noticed. You are becoming expensive to defraud. That is the intention. The remaining bales matched their dispatch weights. Before midnight, the old orangery had become a workroom. Its lemon trees were long dead, but the glass roof still admitted enough light by day, and the stove could warm the center tables. Mrs. Blythe found benches in a disused schoolroom. Martha arranged the women by skill rather than social familiarity. Agnes issued yarn by weight. Honora placed Lady Margaret's patterns in the middle of the longest table, and locked the original coded sheets away after copies were made. 6 workers became 9 by the second morning. 2 were widows. One had been turned away from a York workshop because she brought a baby to the door. Though no child entered the orangery now, another was Martha's cousin, who worked so quickly that Honora suspected speed would become a problem before slowness did. The first collars proved her right. One twisted at the neck, another had scallops so tight they pulled the edge upward. A third looked perfect until Martha laid it flat and found one side nearly half an inch shorter. Honora returned all 3 with the faults marked in chalk. "You'll dock them?" one woman asked. "No, correction time is paid. Even when the mistake is ours, especially then, a hidden mistake becomes an expensive one." Martha watched Honora examine the next piece. "Your mother never paid correction time." "My mother hid wages inside crochet patterns to keep them from being stolen. She had different dangers." The words quieted the table. No one offered sympathy. Honora preferred that. Work resumed. Mrs. Pritchard lasted less than an hour before setting down her hook. Her fingers had stiffened around the narrow handle, and pain showed in the way she opened them one at a time. "I told you," she said. "The stitch turns too sharply." "The stitch or the tool?" Honora asked. Mrs. Pritchard frowned. "The tool." Honora found a damaged cork stopper in the pantry, cut it lengthwise, and wrapped it around the hook with a strip of linen. The result was inelegant. Mrs. Pritchard tested it anyway. Her grip closed more fully. "Warmer," she said, "and wider. Can you work with it?" "Longer than before." Martha looked toward the clock. "Making those for every stiff hand will cost us an hour. Losing a skilled worker costs more." Honora turned to Agnes. "Record the wrapping time under workroom expenses." Agnes wrote it down. By the 3rd day, 4 hooks had padded grips. Mrs. Pritchard produced the cleanest turning row in the room. By the 5th, the orangery held 14 women, and the first 16 approved collars. Honora worked among them, not at the head table. She made mistakes less often than before, but when she discovered one on her own collar, she pulled out 2 hours of stitches without asking anyone else to do it. "That section would pass in York," Martha said. "It would not pass here. No customer would notice. Then we notice for her." Martha studied Honora for a moment, then handed back the collar. "Your tension loosens when you're tired." An inconvenient truth. Most useful truths are. The deadline narrowed. On the 9th day, 1 worker left to accept Lavinia's advance wages in York. On the 10th, another nearly followed, until Agnes showed her the amount already earned at Brackenmere. No one was forbidden to leave. Honora repeated that until the words stopped sounding like a challenge. The women who remained did so knowing the risk. That knowledge changed the room. They began correcting one another without waiting for Martha. They passed the padded hooks to hands that needed them. They divided difficult borders among the most exact workers and gave foundation rows to those who worked faster. The concern began to behave like something larger than Honora's will. On the 12th evening, 37 collars lay wrapped in tissue. 3 remained unfinished. Rain struck the roof, and the stove smoked whenever the wind shifted. Agnes read the figures beside the lamp. If the shipment leaves at dawn, we can still reach York by noon. And if it leaves after, the haberdasher can refuse the order. Mrs. Pritchard's final collar lacked one corner. Martha's cousin had completed her own work and reached for it. Mrs. Pritchard covered the piece with one hand. "No. You're exhausted," Martha said. "So is everyone. It is my corner." Honora sat across from her. "Then finish it. We will adjust the packing schedule." Mrs. Pritchard looked at the clock. "That risks the order. Rushing risks the collar." The older woman picked up her padded hook. One loop, then another. The entire table seemed to follow the movement. No one spoke until the final knot was tied. At dawn, all 40 collars were weighed, checked, and packed into 2 lined crates. Each piece carried a small card marked Thistle and Thread and the initials of its maker. The crates were weighed again after sealing. Agnes entered the figures twice. The underweight bale remained locked in the estate office with its invoice. Honora refused to let it disappear into the general account. The haberdasher's return cart reached York before noon. Confirmation arrived near dusk. All 40 collars had been accepted. Payment would be sent immediately, along with an order for mourning cuffs and infant caps. The amount was enough to cover wages, reimburse the yarn, and make the creditor payment required to delay the auction for 3 months. Honora stood in the orangery the next morning with the wage envelopes arranged by name. The women gathered around the tables, uncertain whether to expect ceremony. She gave them none. "Approved work first," she said. "Creditors afterward." Martha took her envelope and counted the coins. "You could stop the auction sooner if you paid us next week. Then your labor would become a loan you never agreed to make." Mrs. Pritchard opened her envelope slowly. "Full correction time, recorded and paid." The old woman touched the padded handle of her hook. "Your mother would have understood that." Honora looked toward Lady Margaret's patterns. "I hope so." After the wages were distributed, Agnes carried the remaining draft to the estate office. The creditor's clerk arrived before noon. He accepted the payment, signed the postponement, and ordered the red auction notices removed from the hall. One by one, Mrs. Blythe pulled them from the furniture. The paper tore with small dry sounds. No one applauded. Sebastian, standing near the fireplace, raised a cup of weak tea. "To 40 collars," he said. Martha lifted hers, "and to scales that tell the truth." The room answered with quiet laughter. Later, when the workers had gone, a messenger arrived from York, carrying the returned shipping papers and a folded copy of an old complaint filed by Lady Margaret. Her handwriting slanted more sharply than it had on the crochet pattern. 3 sealed crates had arrived short of their recorded weight. The missing value matched nearly 2 months of wages she had promised to the women of Brackenmere. At the bottom she had written, "If the goods are sealed yet lighter, then the seal protects the thief, not the shipment." Honora read the line twice. Sebastian stood across the table, his expression no longer amused. Your mother understood the method, but she could not prove who held the die. Perhaps she came closer than Ambrose realized. Mrs. Blythe entered with a cream envelope on a silver tray. Lavinia's seal pressed dark red wax against the fold. Inside was an offer for a London mourning commission commissioned through the Dowager Marchioness of Wexham. The price could support the workroom for half a year. It was also high enough to purchase more than lace. Honora placed Lady Margaret's complaint beside Lavinia's invitation. "She waited until we proved we could deliver," Agnes said. Sebastian looked at the offer. Which means she does not intend merely to stop you. Honora touched the bone hook lying beside the ledger. No, she said. She intends to decide what success costs. Lady Lavinia Stroud arrived at Brackenmere in a carriage the colour of dark moss, accompanied by an elderly chaperone and a secretary from the Wexham Charitable Committee. The house had not yet recovered from the auction. Pale rectangles marked the walls where paintings had nearly been removed, and the great hall smelled faintly of paste where Mrs. Blythe had scrubbed away the last red labels. Lavinia noticed everything. Her gaze moved from the bare console table to the repaired runner, then to Honora's dark blue dress, which had been altered at the sleeves rather than replaced. "You have become practical," Lavinia said after the first formal greeting. "Necessity has an excellent tailor." Lavinia smiled. "There you are. I had wondered whether poverty had made you dull." Sebastian stood near the drawing room doors with Agnes and the committee secretary. He had arrived that morning to review the postponement papers and had not left when Lavinia's carriage appeared. Honora suspected he trusted the commission less than she did. That was not comforting. It only meant the trap was visible. They entered the morning room, where the damaged table had been cleared of yarn and covered with a clean cloth. Lavinia removed her gloves one finger at a time before placing a folded proposal before Honora. The Dowager Marchioness of Wexham requires a black mourning shawl for a memorial service in London. 6 smaller pieces are to accompany it for close female relations. "And your committee is arranging the commission?" Honora asked. "My committee is arranging several mourning works this season. Society finds grief easier to admire when it is properly dressed." A profitable observation. Charity need not be ugly. Lavinia named the price. Agnes's pencil stopped above the ledger. The sum would support Thistle and Thread for months, cover wages, purchase better tools, and secure enough yarn to survive another creditor demand. It was also more than twice the ordinary value of the work. "You are offering too much," Honora said. "That is an unusual complaint." "Not when the excess purchases something unstated." Lavinia leaned back. "Perhaps it purchases speed. Then the schedule should account for it. Perhaps it purchases discretion. Then the subject of that discretion should be written." The committee secretary shifted in his chair. Sebastian looked toward the windows, though Honora could tell he was listening to every word. Lavinia's expression remained pleasant. "You were not always so cautious. I was not always useful. No, you were entertaining." The old memory came without warning. A London drawing room bright with candles. Lavinia, in pale green silk, standing beside a gentleman whose engagement had not yet been announced. Original Honora had raised her voice just enough for others to hear, and accused Lavinia of pursuing a promised man. Ambrose had stood near the mantel, smiling. The gentleman had denied everything. No one had believed Lavinia completely afterward. Honora felt the shame of it in her throat. "I made an accusation against you without proof," she said. The room stilled. Lavinia's brows lifted. "How noble of you to remember. I remember enough." "Do you?" Lavinia's voice softened. "You remember the laughter? The woman whose invitation was withdrawn the next morning? The gentleman who married someone else because his mother feared scandal?" Honora did not look away. "Yes. And now you wish to apologize because you have discovered work." "No." Lavinia's smile vanished. Honora continued. "I am acknowledging what I did. Forgiveness belongs to you. Responsibility belongs to me." How carefully divided. "Some things must be." Lavinia's gaze sharpened. Society forgives women only when they become smaller afterward. Have you not learned that yet? I have learned society mistakes submission for repentance, and you intend to disappoint it. Repeatedly, Sebastian lowered his head for a moment, hiding what might have been amusement. Lavinia opened the proposal. The shawl must be original. Deep mourning black, suitable in daylight, candlelight, and rain. Delivery in 4 weeks through the Wexham Committee's London receiving rooms. Thistle Thread chooses the yarn supplier, Honora said. Naturally, 1/3 payment in advance. You are barely solvent, which is why advance payment matters. Very well. The pattern remains the property of the workroom. Lavinia's fingers paused on the paper. Why? Because your committee is purchasing finished goods, not the right to reproduce our design. You fear imitation. I fear vague contracts. Sebastian's mouth moved again. Lavinia noticed. Your Grace, do you find commerce amusing? Only when it is honest enough to become uncomfortable. Do you advise Lady Honora to accept? She has not asked me. And if she did, I would tell her the price is too generous. Lavinia turned to Honora. There, even the Duke suspects me. The Duke suspects arithmetic, a distinction only men with estates can afford. Honora slid the proposal toward Agnes. Add recorded weight at dispatch and recorded weight upon receipt. The secretary frowned. That is not customary for finished lace. Neither is a commission priced this far above market. Lavinia considered her. Agreed. Too quickly. Honora felt the warning before she understood it. And if the receiving room refuses to record the weight, then your porter may witness it. In writing. In writing. Agnes amended the terms. The secretary witnessed the changes. Lavinia signed with a steady hand. Honora signed beneath her. For a moment their names lay side by side on the page, 2 women joined by a contract neither trusted. Lavinia rose. I am pleased adversity has improved you. It has made me more expensive to deceive. Do not confuse suspicion with wisdom. Do not confuse access with control. Lavinia drew on her gloves. You once believed humiliation could restore what you thought I had taken. Honora felt Sebastian's attention shift toward her. I was wrong. Yes, Lavinia stepped closer, her voice too low for the secretary, but not for Honora. You were, yet you may discover that being wrong does not free you from what people learned to believe. Honora held her gaze. Then I will give them new evidence. Lavinia's smile returned, colder than before. See that you do. Her carriage had barely cleared the gates when Sebastian entered the morning room again. Agnes remained near the writing desk, sorting copies. The door stood open. You should have refused, he said. Honora picked up a skein of cream wool left beside the pattern basket. You have developed a fondness for beginning conversations badly. The price is bait. I know. The receiving room is hers, the committee's, which she influences. I know. Then why accept? Honora tried to unwind the skein, but a knot tightened beneath her fingers. Because if I refuse every road Lavinia controls, she still decides where I may travel. There is a difference between courage and entering a trap to prove you saw it. There is also a difference between caution and permitting fear to make one's decisions. Sebastian's expression changed. You think that is what I am doing? I think you recognized the danger before reading the contract. He looked at the tangled wool. May I? Honora handed him the skein. He stretched it between both hands while she found the crossed strand. The arrangement required her to stand closer than etiquette preferred, though Agnes's presence made it proper. Sebastian held perfectly still. Honora slipped one loop free, then another. His hands were large enough to make the wool look fragile. I once bought an iron concern, he said. I believed capital could correct poor management. Could it? Not when the new owner understands money better than transport. His tone was dry, but shame sat beneath it. I increased production and ignored warnings about freight costs. Within a year, hundreds of men lost work. Honora's fingers paused over the knot. Did you compensate them? Some. I sold other investments. It was not enough, and since then, every unmeasured risk resembles the same failure. Yes, that does not make you wrong now. No, his gaze met hers across the skein. It makes me afraid in a disciplined manner. The honesty of it unsettled her more than charm would have done. Honora drew the final loop free. Neither stepped back immediately. Sebastian's thumb rested less than an inch from her hand, but he did not close the distance. She did not retreat. The quiet between them narrowed until Agnes turned a page at the desk. You are different, Sebastian said. Different is not innocent. I did not say it was. Do you still believe the worst of me? Not all of it. The answer carried no kindness, yet it felt more intimate than reassurance. Honora took the freed skein from him. Their fingers nearly touched. Progress, she said, painfully measured. You approve of measurement. Only when the scale is honest. Martha entered before either could say more. She carried a black yarn bale tag in one hand and a torn paper label in the other. The first shipment has arrived. Honora saw the concern in her face. How short? Nearly 10 pounds. Martha placed both labels on the table. The upper tag bore the supplier's mark. Beneath it, half concealed by paste, was a second warehouse tag stamped in red. This was attached before the supplier's label, she said. Someone covered it rather than removed it. Sebastian picked up the hidden tag by one corner. York's storage code. Honora looked at Lavinia's newly signed contract, then at the duplicate mark. The commission had been in her hands for less than an hour. The sabotage had begun before she accepted it. Martha laid a strand of the questionable black yarn across a white cloth and held it above the steam rising from a basin. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then a violet shadow bled through the fibers and spread beneath them like ink under thin paper. Agnes drew in a breath. Honora did not. She had expected failure from the moment she saw the hidden warehouse tag. Expectation did not make the stain less dangerous. Cold water, she asked. It held, Martha replied. Barely. Heat brings it out. Sebastian stood near the long table, his expression sharpened by the test. Then, whoever prepared it expected an ordinary inspection. Or knew we would be forced to work quickly, Honora said. She picked up the supplier's invoice. The bale was listed as first-grade black wool, evenly mordanted and suitable for outer garments. It was neither. The outer layers were smooth, but deeper strands felt rougher and less tightly spun. Quarantine the entire bale. Agnes looked toward the work tables. The reserve yarn will cover the main shawl, but not all 6 smaller pieces. Then the shawl comes first. We do not build good labor into bad material. The deadline remains the same. So does rain. Martha turned the stained cloth toward them, and this would fail in it. Honora sent the women back to the reserve yarn and asked Agnes to record the bale's delivered weight, hidden tag, and test result. Sebastian remained, while Martha sealed the questionable wool in fresh canvas. There is a dyer in London who can examine a sample, he said. Mr. Hale. He supplies mourning cloth to several houses. At what price? You are relentless. I am nearly insolvent. A condition that appears to improve your arithmetic. Honora waited. Sebastian surrendered. I will advance the fee and carriage cost. It will be entered in the accounts with agreed interest. No claim on patterns, goods, or future contracts. No favor to be collected later. You make generosity sound indecent. Unrecorded generosity often becomes so. He inclined his head. Then let Agnes record every shilling. The arrangement was entered before the sample left Brackenmere. Work resumed at once. Martha divided the main shawl into sections while Mrs. Pritchard supervised the repeating arches. The design had been altered to reduce weight across the Dowager Marchioness's shoulders without appearing sparse. Honora worked the central wheel herself because the pattern belonged to Lady Margaret and because she did not trust anyone else with the first version. By late afternoon, the bone hook had worn a red line across her forefinger. She wrapped the finger in a strip of linen and continued. The linen slipped twice. On the third attempt, Sebastian's hand closed over the loose end before it fell into the yarn. Honora looked up. He did not touch her skin. "May I?" he asked. The question was so simple that it unsettled her more than assumption would have done. Agnes sat 10 feet away with the accounts. Martha was within sight, at the opposite table. Nothing about the moment was improper. Still, Honora felt the room narrow. She held out her hand. Sebastian wound the linen once around her finger, careful not to pull too tightly. His hands were steady. "You have done this before," she said, bandaged a finger, asked permission. His gaze lifted briefly to hers. Not often enough. He tied the strip and released her at once. Honora flexed her hand. The wrap held. "Care is not a claim," she said. "No, nor does accepting it create one." "No," his voice softened. "I am trying to learn the difference." The answer reached her in a place she had meant to keep guarded. She returned to the shawl before he could see it. "Then consider this a practical lesson. I had hoped for a less painful curriculum. You should not have chosen me as the instructor. I am beginning to suspect I did not choose." Honora glanced up. The words had escaped him without polish. For one suspended second, neither of them moved. Then Martha called for the reserve skeins, and the room returned to work. Mr. Hale's report came 2 days later. The tested yarn had been poorly mordanted and mixed with a lower grade than the invoice described. Cold water might not reveal the weakness. Steam, rain, or warmth against fabric would. The report did not identify who had altered it, but it confirmed the danger. Honora ordered the questionable bale locked away under 2 signatures. The main shawl proceeded entirely in verified reserve wool. The 6 smaller pieces would follow later if Lavinia agreed in writing to a revised schedule. Lavinia's reply arrived before sunset. The memorial date could not move. The shawl alone would be accepted on time, provided it reached the Wexham Committee's London receiving rooms 3 days before the service. The concession was reasonable. That made it more suspicious. Honora read the letter twice. "She wants the shawl separated from the rest of the order," Agnes said, "which makes it easier to isolate." "Or easier to display," Sebastian replied. He had returned from York with a freight register and a list of carriers authorized to use the Wexham receiving rooms. The committee accepts parcels through a private storage chamber before final custody is entered. "How long between arrival and entry?" Honora asked. "Usually less than half an hour. Long enough to open a crate. Only if someone has the seal." Honora looked toward the brass disc NYR 417 resting beside Lady Margaret's pattern, or a matching die. The women finished the shawl the following night. Honora checked every row. Martha checked the border. Mrs. Pritchard tied the final corner with the 3-loop closure Honora had required. The knot sat hidden beneath the last arch. impossible to mistake if anyone examined it closely. Agnes recorded the completed weight. They placed the shawl in tissue, then inside a lined crate. Honora added a small woven marker beneath the upper left corner, where no copyist would think to look. The estate seal was pressed into fresh wax. The exact weight, string pattern, and closure were entered in duplicate. "Too many precautions?" Agnes asked. Honora looked at the crate. "Not if one of them becomes proof." The parcel travelled to London under a carrier Sebastian had used before. A young porter named Thomas Bell, newly assigned to the Wexham receiving rooms, signed the arrival ledger. He was the nephew of Mr. Bell at York Depot, though Honora did not know that until his note returned. The crate arrived at the correct recorded weight. Then it was moved from the public receiving room into a private storage chamber for 17 minutes before final custody was entered. Thomas had followed because he had been told to witness any irregular handling. Through the half-open door, he saw Graves, a foreman from a York overflow warehouse, standing beside the crate. A second man wore the badge of the Wexham Committee. Thomas could not see what they did inside. He did hear one phrase, "Use the old mark." Outside, beneath the covered carriage entrance, a Harcourt freight carriage stood waiting for transfer to the rail yard. Graves crossed to it, carrying something wrapped in felt. Thomas wrote what he had seen and sent the note through his uncle's office to Brackenmere. It arrived the morning of the memorial. Sebastian read it once, then handed it to Honora. "We can demand immediate inspection. Lavinia will say we are delaying delivery, then withdraw the shawl." Honora looked at the final custody entry. The recorded weight still matched. The seal had appeared unbroken. Only the 17 minutes and the porter's words suggested danger. Without proof, withdrawal becomes confession. And proceeding may give her the public failure she wants. "I know." Sebastian studied her face. "You are not required to walk into every trap merely because someone expects you to run from it." "No." Honora folded the note. "But I am required to distinguish fear from evidence. And if the evidence comes too late," she looked at him, "then I stand where it finds me." The memorial service began beneath a low London sky. Rain darkened the chapel steps and gathered along the edges of umbrellas. Honora arrived with Agnes and Sebastian shortly before the Dowager Marchioness's carriage. Lavinia waited beneath the portico in flawless black silk, composed enough to make suspicion look vulgar. The committee maid brought out the shawl. From a distance, the pattern appeared correct. The scalloped border matched Honora's design. The label bore the Thistle Thread name, yet as Lady Wexham settled it over her shoulders, Honora saw the lower corner turn inward where her own work lay flat. She took one step forward. The Marchioness descended from her carriage. A raindrop struck the black wool near her collarbone. Then another. Violet-black colour gathered along the fringe and began to run across the ivory morning gown beneath it. The first dark streak reached the Dowager Marchioness's shoulder before anyone understood what they were seeing. Then the rain thickened, and violet-black dye gathered along the scalloped edge of the shawl, ran through the fringe, and marked the ivory morning gown beneath it in narrow descending lines. A woman near the chapel door gasped. Another stepped backward, as though scandal might spread by touch. Lady Wexham remained still beneath the portico, one hand resting on the head of her cane. The restraint in her face made the humiliation sharper. Lavinia reached her first. "My lady, how dreadful!" She lifted a gloved hand toward the shawl, but did not touch it. "You must remove it at once." Her voice carried beyond necessity. I was assured the provincial workroom understood mourning standards. The words moved through the gathered mourners with the speed of gossip practiced over generations. Honora heard her own name whispered before she reached the steps. One older woman turned to another and said, not quietly enough, "Lady Honora has always confused cruelty with distinction." The memory of another London room opened inside her. Lavinia in green silk, laughter. A woman's reputation collapsing while original Honora stood upright and pleased with herself. For one dangerous second, shame threatened to become panic. Sebastian moved beside Honora, but did not step ahead of her. He did not raise his voice, invoke his title, or tell the crowd what to believe. He only shifted close enough that no one could block her path. "Your choice," he said quietly. "I know." Honora crossed the wet stones. Agnes followed with the dispatch case held beneath her cloak. A York correspondent stood under the far edge of the portico, his notebook already open. Honora stopped before Lady Wexham and bowed her head. "My lady, I am deeply sorry that a garment bearing the name of Thistle and Thread has failed you on this day." Lavinia's gaze sharpened. "Bearing the name?" she repeated. "How carefully spoken." Honora ignored her. "May I examine the shawl?" Lady Wexham looked directly at her. Grief had hollowed the older woman's face, but dignity remained untouched by the rain. "You may." A maid unfastened the shawl and placed it in Honora's hands. The wool felt wrong at once. Coarser, looser. The weight sat unevenly across her palms. She turned the lower corner over. The finishing knot had 2 loops and a clipped tail. Her own shawl had left Brackenmere with a 3-loop closure hidden beneath the last arch. She found the upper left corner and pressed beneath the border. The woven marker was gone. "This is not the shawl we packed," she said. A murmur rose. Lavinia gave a soft sigh. "Surely you do not intend to accuse the Wexham Committee in front of mourners." "I intend to state what I can prove." "And what can you prove?" "The finishing knot is wrong. The wool is not the grade entered in our dispatch account. A private marker beneath the corner is missing." Honora held up the edge. "This piece copied our design. It was not made in our workroom." The correspondent stepped closer. "Lady Honora, are you alleging fraud?" Every face turned toward her. The old Honora would have seized the question like a weapon. She would have named Lavinia, claimed persecution, and given society the spectacle it expected. Honora felt that impulse in the body she inhabited. She let it pass. "I am alleging that the garment Lady Wexham wore was substituted after leaving Brackenmere," she said. "I will publish the evidence whether it clears me or condemns my own work." The correspondent's pencil moved. Lavinia smiled faintly. "How noble! Yet the crate arrived sealed, did it not?" Sebastian's attention shifted toward her. Honora heard the trap. The seal appeared intact. "Then perhaps the simpler explanation is that you sent inferior work and now regret the audience." A few people looked toward Honora with open recognition. They had seen her lie before. That was the punishment original Honora had left behind. Truth now had to cross ground damaged by old cruelty. Honora turned the trade label over. Red thread showed beneath the black stitching. Brackenmere used cream packing thread. Agnes carried a sample in the dispatch case. Honora held both colors side by side. This label was removed and sewn back with red packing thread. Agnes opened the ledger, recorded. "Brackenmere packing thread is cream. The Wexham receiving rooms entered blue thread in their supply account." The committee secretary stiffened. "Red is used at York Depot for damaged or redirected goods." Lavinia's expression changed by no more than a fraction. It was enough. Honora took the small scissors from Agnes and cut the label free without damaging the strand beneath it. She folded the red thread into a paper packet. A thread does not prove who replaced the shawl, Lavinia said. No, Honora replied. It proves the label travelled. Lady Wexham looked down at the ruined gown. Was the dye dangerous? No, my lady. It will not harm you, but it has damaged your clothing and exposed you to ridicule on a day when neither should have been permitted. Honora kept her voice steady. I will return the full commission payment today. I will also bear the cost of restoring or replacing the gown. Agnes looked up, alarm visible in her eyes, but she did not interrupt. Lavinia did. A generous confession. Honora faced her. It is not a confession of sabotage. It is responsibility for harm attached to my name. The distinctions settled over the portico. Some listeners did not understand it. Lady Wexham did. And what will you do after refunding me? She asked. Trace the crate, the private room, the seal, the warehouse tag, and the red thread, then publish the findings. Even if they show negligence at Brackenmere, especially then. The correspondent stopped writing for a moment and looked at her. Lavinia stepped nearer. You speak boldly because the Duke is standing beside you. Honora turned slightly. Sebastian remained where he had been, silent, rain darkening one shoulder of his coat. His Grace has not spoken for me. He has made his preference visible. Sebastian's expression did not change. My presence is not evidence, he said. Lady Honora's records may be. He fell silent again. The answer denied Lavinia the scene she wanted. No ducal declaration, no romantic rescue. Only refusal to let rank replace proof. Lady Wexham extended one hand. Show me the knot. Honora placed the lower corner across her palm and explained the difference. The older woman studied it, then looked toward the committee secretary. Was the crate moved after arrival? The man hesitated. For temporary storage, my lady. For how long? 17 minutes. The exact number struck the crowd harder than a vague denial would have done. Honora felt Agnes beside her, already writing. Who entered the room? She asked. The porter's note names a York warehouse foreman called Graves and a committee employee whose identity he could not confirm, Agnes said. Lavinia turned coldly toward the secretary. You failed to report this. The seal was intact. So you assumed nothing had happened. Honora looked at the stained shawl. That assumption is how the method survives. The correspondent asked another question. Will Thistle Thread continue trading? This one hurt more than the accusation of fraud. It reached beyond Honora to every woman in the orangery. If the work remains honest, she said. Yes, and if customers refuse it. Then we earn their trust again, or we close without lying. A murmur passed through the workers, and attendants gathered near the side entrance. One young woman wore a collar from the first York order. She touched it as though suddenly uncertain whether to hide it. Honora saw the gesture. Shame had already begun spreading from her name onto hands that had done nothing wrong. She turned back to Lady Wexham. I ask no endorsement from you, only permission to retain this shawl as evidence. The Marchioness considered. You may take it, but the gown remains with me. Of course. And the commission is cancelled. Yes, my lady. Lavinia's eyes brightened. Lady Wexham continued. Condemned is not the same as condemned. I will not call Lady Honora a fraud before the inquiry is complete. The brightness vanished. Honora bowed. That is more fairness than I have given others. The older woman's gaze remained severe. Then make better use of it than they did. Sebastian leaned toward Honora. There is a private way through the vestry. Your carriage can be brought around. He offered escape without disguising it as command. Honora looked toward the front steps. Beyond them waited umbrellas, carriages, servants, and enough witnesses to turn her departure into whatever story Lavinia preferred. No. Very well. I will leave by the front. Then I will walk beside you. You need not. I know. Honora carried the ruined shawl over her arms and descended the chapel steps with Sebastian at her side and Agnes one pace behind. The rain cooled her face. No one laughed. No one offered applause. The silence was harsher and more useful than either. By the time they reached Brackenmere that evening, 2 London orders had been withdrawn, and a York merchant had demanded immediate payment. Returned parcels stood along the orangery wall. Half the chairs were empty. One worker had gone home after her husband heard customers calling Thistle and Thread fraudulent. Another remained but would not meet Honora's eyes. Agnes placed the accounts on the long table. If we refund Lady Wexham and honour the returned orders, there is not enough for wages and the yarn merchant. Wages first. Then he may close up. Credit. Wages first. Martha stood near the stove. The women want to know whether the workroom survives the week. Honora looked at the empty chairs, the red thread packet, and the counterfeit shawl. I cannot promise survival. I can promise the truth. Mrs. Blythe entered carrying a sealed notice. Lord Ambrose had applied to have a receiver appointed over Brackenmere's disputed commercial goods and accounts, unless payment or contrary evidence was produced within 7 days. Thistle and Thread stock could be taken into custody. Honora laid the notice beside the shawl. Sebastian watched her from the doorway. You have had enough for one day, he said. That is what people say when they want a woman to become less inconvenient by mourning. I meant that you should sleep, then recommend it after the returned parcels are weighed. His mouth almost curved, but concern prevented it. Honora opened Agnes's ledger. Every parcel, she said. Departure weight, return weight, seal, thread, and knot. We begin now. Outside, rain struck the orangery roof. Inside, Martha lifted the first returned package onto the scale. The needle stopped well below the number written at dispatch. By sunrise, every returned parcel had been opened, weighed, and placed in one of 3 rows across the orangery floor. Agnes had slept for less than 2 hours. Martha had not slept at all. Honora stood at the long table with the counterfeit shawl on one side, Ambrose's notice on the other, and the wage ledger open between them. The numbers were worse than fear. If every refund was honoured, the yarn merchant paid, and wages protected, Thistle and Thread would not survive the week. Through the glass doors, women gathered beneath the covered walk. Some had brought husbands or sisters. Others held empty work baskets. They were not waiting to hear whether Honora had been wronged. They wanted to know whether their work still had value. Martha looked toward them. They should hear it from you. Honora carried the cash box into the orangery. The room quieted as she entered. Everyone who completed approved work will be paid today, she said. Even if the customer returned it, one woman asked. Yes. What about next week? Honora did not soften the truth. I cannot promise next week. Anxiety passed through the room. Mrs. Pritchard lowered her eyes. A younger worker clutched her basket more tightly. Lady Lavinia's agent is offering 2 weeks' wages in advance, another woman said. For finishers. Martha's mouth hardened. With what terms? None written. Only that we leave today. Honora understood. Lavinia did not need every worker. She only needed enough skilled hands to break production and prove the scandal permanent. You are free to accept, Honora said. Several faces lifted in surprise. The money already earned remains yours. No one will lose wages for leaving. And if we stay, Martha asked, then you stay because the terms still suit you, not because I have frightened you into loyalty. She began handing out envelopes. Coins changed hands. Some women counted immediately. Others held the weight of the payment in silence. When the last envelope had been given, Martha moved to the center of the room. We should decide together. Honora turned toward her. Decide what? Whether the workroom continues. Martha looked around at the women. Not whether we like Lady Honora. Not whether we trust London. Whether we will keep working under accounts we can see. One of the younger women frowned. What if the money runs out? Then it runs out in front of us, Martha said, not behind a locked office door. Agnes brought the wage and order ledgers to the table. Honora placed them beside the cash box. Every debt, every payment, every refund, every shortage. You may inspect them. Mrs. Pritchard adjusted the padded hook in her hand. And the yarn? No one works questionable yarn, Honora said. No deduction if Martha or Agnes marks it unfit after inspection. No hidden loans, another asked. None. No unpaid correction? None. Martha raised her hand. Then those willing to continue under those terms, stay. Those who are not, leave with what they earned. 3 women stepped toward the door. One cried quietly as she went. Honora thanked each of them for the work already done and did not ask them to reconsider. The rest remained, not out of devotion, not out of pity. They stayed because they had seen the accounts and chosen the risk. The distinction steadied the room. Agnes returned to the ledger. After wages, we cannot meet the York merchant's demand in full. How short? Agnes named the sum. It was smaller than ruin and larger than hope. He may close our credit by evening. Before Honora could answer, wheels sounded in the yard. Sebastian entered the orangery carrying a slim leather case. His secretary remained by the door. He took in the empty chairs, the open ledgers, and the envelopes in the women's hands. I have a proposal, he said. Honora looked at the case. That phrase has not improved with repetition. No. His tone held no humor. May we speak? Here. He hesitated, then placed the case on the table before Agnes and Martha. Very well. He opened it and removed a draft agreement. House Harcourt will discharge the immediate debts, guarantee wages for 1 year, and provide working capital for yarn and freight. A murmur moved through the women. Honora read the first page. The language was careful. The result was not. And in return, she asked, you remain designer and superintendent of the workrooms. Your name remains on the concern. Who approves contracts? Trustees. Chosen by whom? 2 by House Harcourt, 1 by you. Suppliers, the trustees. Wages, subject to annual review. Pottons, yours. Profits, distributed according to the capital advanced. Honora closed the document. You would pay the debts by taking authority over everything that determines whether the work remains mine. Sebastian's jaw tightened. I would prevent the workroom from closing by making me the named proprietress of a concern controlled by your trustees. You would retain design authority until design becomes too expensive. That is not my intention. Intent does not govern the contract. The women had gone silent. Sebastian glanced toward them. 20 families may lose income because you refuse terms that preserve employment. Honora felt the words strike where he intended. That was what made them hurt. Do not use their wages to make ownership sound like mercy. His expression changed. She continued before he could defend himself. You came here during an auction and watched strangers place labels on what they believed they had the right to take. Now you offer to remove the labels if I sign the work beneath your house. That is not the same. No, it is more elegant." Sebastian went still. Honora pressed her hand flat against the agreement. "You see a failing concern. I see women who chose to stay after reading the accounts. You see risk. I see authority they finally understand belongs somewhere visible. And if the concern collapses, then it collapses under terms we chose. That is pride." "No," her voice lowered. "Pride was believing I could wound Lavinia and remain untouched. This is self-respect." For several seconds, only rain against the glass roof could be heard. Sebastian looked at the document, then toward the open wage ledger. His gaze moved to the empty chairs left by the women who had gone. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. "I told myself I was preserving what you built." "Were you?" He did not answer at once. "No," he said. "I was preserving the part I could control." The admission stripped the anger from the room more effectively than apology. He gathered the pages but did not place them back in the case. Instead, he tore the signed cover sheet across the middle. "The offer is withdrawn." Honora had wanted him to understand. She had not expected understanding to hurt. "You need not destroy it." "I do." He folded the torn paper once. "It repeats the logic of the auction. I should have seen that before bringing it to you." No one spoke. Sebastian closed the case. "The debt remains yours. So does the concern." He turned toward the door, then stopped. "I am sorry." The words were not polished. He did not ask whether she forgave him. He left. Honora stood motionless until the carriage sounds faded beyond the yard. Martha came to the table. "You wanted him to understand." "Yes, he did. Too late." Martha studied her face. "Not always." Honora looked away. The pain was sharper because she had begun to believe Sebastian saw her clearly. Now she understood that even respect could become possession if fear was allowed to write the terms. Agnes broke the silence by placing the first returned parcel on the scale. "We still have the matter that may keep us alive." Honora nodded. "Open it." The string had been reteed neatly. The wax bore an estate impression, but the edge carried a shallow broken crescent. Martha cut the wrapping. Fine black wool lined the outer layer. Beneath it lay cheaper yarn packed loosely to preserve the shape. Agnes compared the departure and return weights. 14% missing. They opened a second parcel. The same arrangement. Fine wool outside, inferior yarn within, 15% missing. A third showed 14 again. "Not random theft," Martha said. "A measure." "A system," Honora replied. She took the magnifying lens and examined the seal impression. The broken crescent matched the chip on Lady Margaret's brass seal. "NYR 417, Agnes whispered. "The route has been closed for 6 years." "The route is closed," Honora said. "The die is not." Martha lifted a strand from the cheap inner yarn. Violet-black fibers clung to the wax groove. The same color had run down Lady Wexham's gown. Agnes turned the returned parcel over. Beneath the outer paper, hidden by a newer label, lay a red York warehouse tag, the same storage code as the first black yarn bale. Honora set Sebastian's torn agreement aside and drew the shipping records closer. The order dates, return weights, and warehouse marks formed a line no creditor could yet see. Somewhere between Brackenmere and the customer, good wool was being removed, inferior yarn substituted, and parcels resealed with a retired dye. This was not merely an attempt to ruin Thistle Thread. Someone was profiting from its destruction. A knock sounded at the outer door. The stationer's boy from York stood there with a message sent through Mr. Bell at the depot. Honora opened it. 3 recent consignments bearing disputed marks, had all passed through the same overnight storage building. Vane Warehouse. At the bottom, Mr. Bell had written one question. Why does a warehouse leased under a widow's name receive freight through Lord Ambrose Fenwick's agent? Honora folded the note. Around her, the women waited. The concern had less than a week of money, fewer workers than yesterday, and no duke standing between it and seizure. For the first time, that did not feel like abandonment. It felt like the truth stripped of decoration. Agnes, move the duplicate records to York, she said. Martha, choose 2 returned parcels and lock the rest. No one touches the seals. And the workroom? Martha asked. Honora looked at the women who had chosen to stay. It remains open. She placed Lady Margaret's brass seal beside the new wax impression. The chips matched exactly. We do not need someone to buy us, she said. We need to find who has been selling what they stole. The first returned parcel weighed 14 pounds less than the figure entered at Brackenmere. The second was short by 15. The third had lost almost exactly 14% of its original weight, though its shape remained neat enough to pass beneath a careless hand. Honora stood in the rented office above a York stationer's shop while Agnes read the numbers aloud, and Martha cut through the outer wrapping. Fine black wool lined the top and sides of the parcel. Beneath it, cheaper yarn had been packed loosely into the center. They took enough to profit, Martha said, but not enough to make the parcel collapse. Honora lifted one of the inferior strands. Violet black fibers came away against her glove and replaced the weight badly enough to damage the work. Not badly, Agnes said, deliberately. If the parcel had returned too light, the customer would have complained before wearing it. This amount can be blamed on packing, moisture, or error. Honora looked at the 3% figures written in Agnes' hand. 14, 15, 14. The repetition was more chilling than a larger theft would have been. It meant someone had a method, a measure, perhaps even a written instruction. Outside, the goods depot rang with the clatter of wheels and the hiss of steam. The office windows trembled whenever a locomotive passed. Mr. Bell, the York depot clerk, stood near the door with a copy of the freight register beneath his arm. He had agreed to witness the weighing because his name appeared on 2 of the disputed transfers, and because Lady Margaret's old complaint still troubled him. All 3 parcels entered York at the proper departure weight, he said. All 3 were redirected from the public receiving shed during overnight congestion. To Vane Warehouse, Honora said. Yes. On which nights? Mr. Bell opened the register. Tuesday. Friday. Tuesday again. Agnes turned to the current schedules spread across the desk. Those are the only nights the Bradford goods wagon arrives after the regular clerks leave. A smaller staff, Martha said. Fewer eyes. Mr. Bell nodded, and temporary storage becomes easier to excuse. Honora took up Lady Margaret's brass seal and held it beside the wax impression cut from the returned parcel. The chipped crescent matched. Whoever opened these used the old root die. Or a copy made from it, Mr. Bell said. Could a copy repeat this defect? Not perfectly. The chip is accidental. A copy might resemble it. But the broken crescent would not fall in precisely the same place on every impression. Agnes placed the 3 wax fragments beneath the magnifying lens. Each showed the same uneven bite along the edge. Honora felt the mystery tighten. Lady Margaret had known sealed crates arrived light. She had hidden weights inside crochet patterns because Ambrose ignored women's work. Now, the same mark had appeared on sabotaged goods tied to Lavinia's commission. The method had not been invented for Thistle and Thread. It had been waiting for a concern worth stealing from. A knock sounded at the lower door. Moments later, a young porter climbed the narrow stairs. Thomas Bell looked younger in daylight than he had in the note from London, though the seriousness in his face belonged to someone who had learned caution quickly. Mr. Bell introduced him as his nephew. "You saw Graves at the Wexham receiving rooms?" Honora asked. "Yes, my lady." Thomas removed his cap. He stood beside the crate while another man held the door. Afterward, he crossed to a Harcourt freight carriage with something wrapped in felt. Sebastian's name entered the room without anyone speaking it. Honora kept her voice steady. "Did you see what was inside the wrapping?" "No, but I heard him say, 'The old Mark will do,' and today I saw him again at York Depot before dawn." Thomas swallowed. He was speaking with Mr. Pritcham near the overflow sheds. Mr. Pritcham told him the widow had become unreliable. "Which widow?" "He didn't say." Mr. Bell looked toward the freight register. "Vane Warehouse is leased under Eliza Vane's name." Martha's expression changed. "Eliza worked at Brackenmere for 6 days. Before the memorial?" Honora asked. "Yes, she left when Lavinia's agent offered advance wages." Agnes found the worker list. Eliza Vane's name appeared beside 2 completed foundation rows and 1 unfinished cuff. She had also signed for Tuesday shipping schedules while helping with packing. "She knew which consignments carried fine wool," Agnes said, "and which days they travelled." Honora closed the ledger. "Find her." Martha left at once. Honora did not wait in the office. She asked Mr. Bell to show them the public receiving shed and the route taken by redirected goods. The depot yard spread beneath a low grey sky, busy enough to conceal almost anything done with confidence. Carts crossed between platforms. Porters rolled barrels past wool bales. Beyond the main sheds, a narrower lane ran behind the coal stores toward a row of private warehouses. Vane Warehouse stood at the far end, its brick wall dark with damp and its upper windows painted over. "No direct view from the public platform," Honora said. "That is why overflow tenants pay less," Mr. Bell replied. "They also receive less supervision." At the corner of the lane, Honora stopped beside a wagon scale. A bale marked for another merchant sat waiting. She watched 2 men lift it, adjust the rope, and move on without recording the weight. "How are transfers entered after hours?" she asked. "The porter writes the destination. The warehouse foreman confirms receipt the next morning. So, the same man can receive a parcel, alter it overnight, and confirm it at dawn." Mr. Bell's mouth tightened. "If he is dishonest, and if the seal looks intact, no one weighs it again." "Usually not." Honora looked toward Vane Warehouse. Lady Margaret wrote, "Wait before departure. Wait again at York." She understood the weakness was not the seal. It was the absence of a second weighing. A carriage rolled past the far gate, bearing the dark crest of House Harcourt. Honora recognized it from Thomas's description. The vehicle did not belong to Sebastian's personal use. It was a freight carriage operating under a commercial concession attached to his house. Thomas pointed. "That's the carriage Graves approached in London." The sight stirred pain Honora had tried to set aside. Sebastian had withdrawn his proposal and admitted the truth of what he had done. That did not erase the wound. Now his house's name appeared inside the same route that had sabotaged her work. "Who manages that carriage?" she asked. Mr. Bell consulted the freight sheet, sublet through an intermediary called North Vale Transport. Agnes examined the entry. The account is paid by Pritcham. The chain was no longer hidden. It was merely incomplete. By late afternoon, Martha returned with Eliza Vane. The widow entered the office with rain on her coat and fear written plainly across her face. She was perhaps 35, though worry had aged her. "I didn't touch your parcels," she said before sitting. "I never opened one." "Then tell me why your name is on the warehouse lease," Honora replied. Eliza stared at the floor. "My husband died owing money to Lord Ambrose." "How much?" Eliza named a sum large enough to take a cottage and small enough to be cruelly useful. "Ambrose held the debt notes," she continued. "He said he would remove my daughter from the cottage if I refused to sign. Lady Lavinia's agent paid the rent. Mr. Pritcham collected the keys. Agnes began writing. "You gave them our schedules," Honora said. Eliza's hands tightened around each other. "Yes. And the names of skilled finishers. Yes. Did you know what they intended?" "Not at first." "And later," Eliza looked up. Shame had replaced fear. "I knew enough to stop asking." Martha turned away. Honora did not. "If you testify, you tell all of it. Not only what they did to you, what you did to us. Will you protect my daughter? A solicitor may challenge the debt notes if they were used to compel a fraudulent lease. I can ask for that protection. I will not purchase your silence or excuse your part." Eliza nodded once. "That is fair. Who held the old die?" "Graves. He kept it wrapped in felt." Thomas shifted near the door. Eliza noticed him. If the warehouse was likely to be searched, he moved it to a wagon tool chest. "Which wagon?" Honora asked. "The Harcourt freight carriage." The room fell quiet. "Where in the carriage?" "Near the brake box." He said no inspector searched a noble house's equipment twice. Honora thought of Sebastian's title, stopping the wool seizure at Brackenmere. Power could protect. It could also become the place thieves expected no one to question. Who ordered the substitutions? Pritcham brought lists. Sometimes Ambrose's clerk came. Once a Wexham committee maid checked the parcels against black mourning orders. Did Lavinia come herself? No. Did you see her signature? No. Eliza took a shaking breath. But Pritcham said the charitable line needed the fine wool before London buyers saw Lady Honora's work. There it was. Profit and destruction joined in one sentence. Lavinia did not merely want Thistle and Thread to fail. She wanted its best material, its designs and its market. A railway clerk burst into the office before Agnes could ask another question. "Miss Bell, they're clearing Vane Warehouse." "When?" Mr. Bell demanded. "Now. 2 carts are already loaded. Graves says the lease ends tonight." Honora stood. "What is being moved?" "Wool bales, tool chests, and sealed crates." Eliza went pale. "The die will be in the Harcourt carriage if he had warning." Agnes gathered the ledgers. Martha reached for her coat. Honora looked once at Sebastian's crest, visible through the depot window, then at the chipped seal in her hand. She had refused to let him buy the concern. Now she would have to ask whether he was willing to open his own house to the same scrutiny he had once tried to impose on hers. "Send word to the Duke of Condemns," she said. "Tell him I need access, not rescue." Mr. Bell moved toward the stairs. Honora followed. Outside, the first loaded cart turned from the warehouse lane toward the main gate. "And stop that cart," she said, "before the truth leaves York under someone else's seal." The first cart was 20 yards from the gate when Honora stepped into its path. The driver pulled hard on the reins. The horses slowed, stamping in the wet yard, while one of the warehouse men shouted for her to move. "These goods are under private lease," he called. "Then they can remain private while they are weighed," Honora replied. Mr. Bell reached the gate and ordered it closed. The iron bars came together behind the cart with a sound that stopped every man in the yard. Graves emerged from Vane warehouse carrying a ring of keys and a folded paper. He was broad through the shoulders, grey at the temples, and calm enough to suggest he had expected resistance. "Lady Honora," he said, "you have no authority here, neither do you, if those goods are connected to a disputed shipment, their household freight. Then the weights will agree with the records." Graves looked toward Mr. Bell. "Open the gate." "Not until the railway office confirms the transfer," Mr. Bell said. "You're obstructing lawful removal. You are removing goods after an allegation of fraud," Agnes answered, opening her notebook. "That distinction will interest the inspector." Graves's gaze shifted to Eliza. Fear moved across her face, but she did not lower her eyes. "You signed the lease," he said, "and I'm telling them who used it," she replied. He turned toward the rear of the warehouse. Martha saw the movement first. "He's leaving." Graves did not run. He walked quickly between two freight sheds, preserving the appearance of dignity until the darkness swallowed him. Honora resisted the urge to follow. The goods mattered more than the man. "Seal both exits," she told Mr. Bell, "and no cart moves without recorded weight. I cannot seize private property. I am not asking you to seize it. I am asking you to preserve the condition in which it was found." Wheels sounded beyond the yard. A dark carriage stopped outside the closed gate. Sebastian stepped down before the footman reached the door. He had come without ceremony, accompanied only by his secretary and a railway solicitor. His gaze took in the blocked cart, the open warehouse, Eliza's pale face, and Honora standing in the rain. "You asked for access," he said, "not rescue." "I remember." Mr. Bell opened the gate just wide enough to admit them, then closed it again. Honora handed Sebastian the freight sheet showing the Harcourt concession and North Vale transport. "Your carriage was used in London after the shawl crate entered private storage." Eliza says Graves hid the old die near its brake box whenever he expected a search. Sebastian read the entry once. "That carriage is due to leave York before midnight. Then stop it. I can place a temporary hold under the concession while records are reviewed. Can you open it with a railway inspector present?" "How quickly?" His eyes met hers. "If I use the telegraph before the next hour, do it." There was no hesitation and no attempt to take command. Sebastian turned to his secretary. "Send an immediate wire to the district inspector. State suspected misuse of a retired railway die and disputed freight under a Harcourt concession. Request a provisional hold on the carriage and all goods from Vane warehouse." The secretary left at once. Honora looked toward the open warehouse. "We should inventory what remains. Lead the way." Inside, the air smelled of damp wool, rope, and hot wax. Bales stood in rows along the brick walls. Some bore current merchant marks. Others had labels pasted over older tags. A tool chest sat beneath the foreman's desk. Mr. Bell tried the official railway keys until the fourth turned. The lid lifted. Inside lay packing knives, sealing wax, coils of red thread spare string, and a shallow wooden slot shaped to hold a round brass die. The slot was empty. Martha picked up the red thread and compared it with the strand removed from Lady Wexham's counterfeit shawl. Same thickness, same twist. Agnes recorded the contents. Honora ran one finger along the empty slot. Felt fibers clung to the wood. Graves moved it. Eliza stood near the door, trembling. He always moved it when inspectors came. "To the Harcourt carriage?" Honora asked. "Yes, near the brake box." He said no one searched a noble house's equipment twice. Sebastian heard the words. His face changed, though his voice did not. He was correct until today. In the foreman's desk, Agnes found a locked lower drawer. The railway solicitor authorized its opening in the presence of Mr. Bell, Eliza, and 2 warehouse laborers. Inside were overnight storage records, transfer slips, and a narrow sheet divided into dates, shipment marks, and percentages: 14, 15, 14. Honora did not need Agnes to explain them. "The amounts removed," she said, measured before the parcels were resealed. Martha pointed to initials beside each line: Pritcham. Another mark appeared on 3 entries, a small stamped crest rather than a signature. House Fenwick. Ambrose had not signed his name, but someone acting under his authority had approved the movement. "This is enough to justify a public inspection," Sebastian said. "Not enough to prove Lavinia's role," Honora replied. "No." He turned another page. "But the Wexham Committee account appears here. One payment matched the date of the black yarn bale. Another fell the day before the shawl reached London. The figures were indirect. No woman of Lavinia's intelligence would leave a plain instruction to sabotage. She used the committee to purchase what was taken," Honora said. "Or someone used the committee's account without her knowledge," Sebastian replied. "You do not believe that. Belief is not evidence." The answer should have irritated her. Instead, she recognized the discipline in it. He was holding Lavinia to the same standard Honora had demanded for herself. Outside, a locomotive whistle cut through the rain. Mr. Bell appeared at the warehouse door. "The district inspector has replied. He will attend. The Harcourt carriage is held on siding 3. And Ambrose?" Agnes asked. "His solicitor has advanced the petition. The receiver may take custody of disputed Brackenmere goods at sunrise unless contrary evidence is lodged." Honora looked at the warehouse clock. Less than 7 hours remained. Then the inspection must happen tonight. The railway solicitor shook his head. "An emergency commercial examination can be arranged, but only if the principal creditors agree to delay seizure and a magistrate witnesses preservation of evidence." "How many people are required?" Sebastian asked. "1 authorized railway inspector, the magistrate or his clerk, 2 principal creditors, a merchant witness, the shipper, the carrier, anyone whose account is directly implicated." "No crowd," Honora said. "No spectacle." "The press will hear of it," Sebastian replied. "One local correspondent already follows the shawl scandal. Then 1, not half of London." He nodded. Agreed. The simplicity of that agreement pulled at the wound he had made in the orangery. Honora set it aside. "There is another matter." She handed him the Harcourt carriage account. "If these records are opened, your house becomes part of the inquiry. It already is. The concession supports your railway reform measure. Yes, your opponents will say you failed to supervise the carriers who used it. They will be correct. You could limit the inspection to Vane Warehouse and preserve my reputation by closing the door where the evidence continues." Sebastian's expression hardened, but not against her. "No." The answer came without calculation. "Every Harcourt freight record connected to North Vale Transport will be opened." Honora studied him. "Even if it costs the measure, especially then." "Why?" "Because reform built on concealed failure is another form of fraud." His gaze held hers. "And because I have already learned what happens when I decide control matters more than truth." The warehouse noise receded around them. Honora saw the man who had offered to buy Thistle and Thread because risks frightened him. Now he was placing his own power where it could be weighed. "I do not ask you to trust my intentions," he said. "Judge what I am willing to lose." Honora's hand moved before caution could stop it. She caught the sleeve of his coat, just above the wrist. The contact lasted 1 second. No more. Sebastian went still. She released him. "Then open everything," she said. "I will." The promise passed between them without softness, yet it carried more intimacy than the linen around her finger had done. They returned to the yard as the first telegraph replies arrived. The local magistrate agreed to witness the preservation of evidence. 2 creditors would delay seizure until sunrise under Sebastian's written guarantee. A York merchant who had returned Honora's goods consented to attend. The district inspector was 10 miles away and travelling by rail. Agnes began assembling dispatch ledgers. Martha selected 1 current bail and 3 disputed parcels, marking them only by number. Eliza signed a preliminary statement in the solicitor's presence. Thomas Bell identified the Harcourt carriage on siding 3. "We search it before the inspection," Honora said. "The inspector must be present," Mr. Bell reminded her. "Then the moment he arrives." Sebastian checked the station clock. The carriage is held, but the coupling crew changes at 11. If Graves has an accomplice, that is when he will try to move the die, or destroy it. Honora looked toward the dark line of wagons beyond the warehouse roofs. "Where exactly is the break box?" Thomas described the iron housing beneath the rear platform. Eliza interrupted. "Not always there. Graves said the break box was too obvious after the London transfer." "Where else?" Honora asked. Eliza closed her eyes, searching memory. He mentioned a lamp, something about hollow space and soot-hiding brass. A coupling lamp, not the break box. Honora turned toward siding 3. One of the carriage lamps had been removed and set on a maintenance cart beside the track. A railway man was already rolling it away. "Stop that lamp," she said. The man looked back, startled. The cart continued moving toward the furnace shed. Honora gathered her skirts and ran. Behind her, Sebastian called for the gate to be closed again. Ahead, the black metal lamp rocked once on the cart, carrying whatever Graves had hidden inside it toward fire. Honora reached the maintenance cart, or before it entered the furnace shed, and caught the iron handle with both hands. The railway man pushing it stopped in surprise. "My lady, that lamp's marked for disposal." "Then it can wait 5 minutes. It's cracked. So is the seal we are looking for." Sebastian arrived a breath later with Mr. Bell and the district inspector, whose coat was still damp from the train. The inspector introduced himself as Mr. Hargreaves, examined the provisional hold, and ordered the cart returned beneath the platform lamps. "No one touches the carriage equipment without witness," he said. The maintenance man stepped back. Honora looked at the coupling lamp. Soot blackened its metal frame. One glass panel had split near the hinge. Eliza's memory had not named a precise compartment, only hollow space and soot. The lamp seemed too small to conceal a brass die until Honora noticed the oil reservoir beneath it. "Remove the burner," she said. Mr. Hargreaves frowned. "Why?" "Because the brake box was meant to be obvious. This was meant to be discarded." He gave permission, Mr. Bell unscrewed the upper fitting. The burner came free, followed by a wad of oily cloth packed where the reservoir should have held fuel. Thomas leaned closer. "That's the felt Graves carried." Honora did not reach into the lamp. Mr. Hargreaves used tongs. The cloth emerged black with soot. When he unfolded it, a brass die rolled onto the inspection tray with a dull metallic sound. NYR 417. The chipped crescent along its edge was filled with violet fibers and a strand of red packing thread. No one spoke for several seconds. Sebastian looked at Honora. There was no triumph in his face, only recognition. She had found it. "Record the place and condition," she said. Agnes was already writing. Thomas identified the felt wrapping as the same kind Graves had carried in London. Eliza confirmed that he stored the die wrapped in felt. Mr. Hargreaves placed it in a sealed evidence box, then searched the Harcourt freight carriage with 2 railway men. The brake box was empty, but a maintenance slip beneath the rear platform showed that the coupling lamp had been removed by Graves's instruction less than an hour earlier. A second notation listed the requesting account as North Vale Transport. Sebastian read the line and handed it back without comment. Honora saw what it cost him. House Harcourt's crest stood painted above the carriage door, while evidence of fraud came out from beneath it. "The inspection begins now," Mr. Hargreaves said. "The magistrate is waiting in the public goods hall." The hall had been cleared of ordinary freight. Gas lamps burned above 2 platform scales. The local magistrate stood beside his clerk, present to witness statements and preserve disputed evidence, not to decide the entire case. 2 principal creditors waited near the entrance with Ambrose's solicitor. A York merchant who had returned Thistle and Thread's goods stood opposite Martha. Lady Wexham had not yet arrived. The York correspondent from the chapel occupied a place near the back. His notebook closed until the magistrate gave permission. Lavinia entered with the Wexham committee secretary, just as the station clock struck 11. Her black cloak was dry despite the weather. Ambrose came moments later, pale with anger, and carrying the receiver petition beneath his arm. "This inspection has no power to delay lawful seizure," he said. The magistrate looked at him over his spectacles. "The creditors have agreed to wait until sunrise under the Duke of Condemns' written guarantee. We have time to determine whether the goods you seek to control were altered in transit." Ambrose turned towards Sebastian. "You place your house behind her accusation?" "I place it behind the inspection," Sebastian said. "My records are open with hers." That answer disturbed Ambrose more than a declaration of loyalty would have done. Mr. Hargreaves called for the first bail. It was a current consignment selected from undamaged stock. Agnes read the Brackenmere dispatch weight. Mr. Bell read the York arrival weight. The figures agreed within ordinary handling allowance. The current seal was intact. Martha opened the bale and drew yarn from the center. Fine wool lay evenly packed throughout. She held a length over steam, then pressed it to white cloth. No color ran. "Proper grade," she said. "Stable dye." Lavinia lifted one brow. Then, "Lady Honora can produce honest work after all." Honora did not answer. "The disputed bale," Mr. Hargreaves said. 2 railway workers placed it on the second scale. Agnes read the departure weight, 120 pounds. Mr. Bell checked the return record, 103 pounds. 14% missing. The number moved through the hall more sharply than a whisper. The old wax impression bore the retired route mark and the same chipped crescent as the die recovered from the coupling lamp. Mr. Hargreaves broke the seal. Fine black wool lined the top and sides. Martha cut deeper. Cheaper yarn filled the center. She removed equal lengths from both grades. The fine wool held under steam. The inner yarn released violet-black dye into the water and stained the white cloth beneath it. Lady Wexham entered as the color spread. Her maid carried the ruined ivory gown across both arms. The Marchioness walked to the evidence table and placed the gown beside the stained cloth. "That," she said, "is what your figures looked like on a day of mourning." Her gaze moved to Honora. "Continue." The second and third disputed bales were weighed without repeating the full demonstration. One was short by 15%, the other by 14%. Both carried the retired dye mark. Both contained inferior yarn inside fine outer layers. Their samples produced the same violet stain. Agnes presented the summary sheet. Every damaged parcel passed through York on a Tuesday or Friday night. Everyone entered Vane warehouse. Everyone lost nearly the same proportion of weight. Mr. Hargreaves opened the warehouse record found in Graves's desk. The percentages matched. Pritcham's initials appeared beside each transfer. Ambrose's solicitor stepped forward. An employee's notation proves nothing about Lord Ambrose. Then let the witnesses speak, the magistrate said. Eliza entered the center of the hall with the solicitor who had challenged her husband's debt notes. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not disappear. She admitted signing the Vane lease under threat of losing her daughter's cottage. She admitted giving Pritcham shipping schedules and the names of skilled workers. She admitted knowing, later, that the information was being used against Thistle and Thread. "Why did you continue?" the magistrate asked. "Because I was afraid," she said, "and because fear was easier when I called it protection." Honora felt Martha beside her go still. Eliza looked directly at the workers. "I harmed women who had less security than I did because I wanted to keep what little I had. I won't pretend I did not know enough." The honesty altered the room. Not forgiveness. "Wait, who held the warehouse keys?" Mr. Hargreaves asked. "Graves." Pritcham collected them. Lord Ambrose's clerk came with him more than once. And the old die? Graves kept it. When he expected a search, he moved it to the Harcourt carriage. Thomas confirmed seeing Graves with the felt-wrapped object in London, and again at York. The maintenance slip tied Graves to the lamp removal. Mr. Hargreaves placed the recovered die beside Lady Margaret's brass seal and 3 false wax impressions. The chipped edge matched all of them. Ambrose's face remained controlled. "This proves theft by freight employees," he said. "It does not prove I ordered it." "No," Honora replied. "It proves the method." She turned to Lavinia. "The money trail proves who profited." Lavinia's expression did not change. A bold claim. "Then your committee accounts should make it easy to refute." The Wexham secretary hesitated. Lady Wexham struck the floor once with the tip of her cane. "Open them." The secretary unlocked a narrow account case. Agnes compared the committee purchases with the stolen shipment dates. One entry paid North Vale Transport the day after the first black yarn bale arrived short. Another purchased high-grade mourning wool 2 days after Thistle and Thread lost the same amount. A third recorded a confidential advance authorized by Lady Lavinia Stroud. On the exact date the counterfeit shawl entered private storage. The room tightened around the page. Lavinia looked at the entry and then at her secretary. "That advance funded committee purchases. From whom?" Honora asked. "An agent. Name him. Mr. Pritcham." Mr. Hargreaves turned the next account page. There, beneath Pritcham's initials, was a list of yarn weights matching the amounts missing from Brackenmere consignments. Lavinia recovered quickly. An agent can exceed his authority. "He can," Honora said, "which is why the instruction attached to the advance matters." Agnes lifted a folded memorandum from the case. Its seal had already been broken, but Lavinia's signature remained clear beneath one sentence. "Ensure Lady Honora cannot fulfill the memorial commission under her own mark." No one spoke. Lavinia's face lost color for the first time. Ambrose looked at her, not with shock but calculation. The conspiracy had reached the point where each would have to decide which truth to sacrifice first. Honora met Lavinia's eyes across the evidence table. "You did not merely expect me to fail," she said. You paid to make certain the failure wore my name. Lavinia did not deny the signature. She denied its meaning. The phrase concerns commercial representation. She said, Lady Honora was not to fulfill the commission under her own mark because the Wexham Committee intended to present the work as charitable production. Honora held her gaze. Then, why was the shawl returned to the public under the Thistle and Thread label? The committee secretary looked down. Ambrose stepped forward before Lavinia could answer. Because Pritcham exceeded his instructions. Lavinia turned toward him. You employed Pritcham, through North Vale Transport, at your recommendation, for lawful freight, with your money. The magistrate raised one hand. You will speak in turn. Silence returned, but the alliance between them had broken. Sebastian watched from beside the Harcourt account books, his face unreadable. Mr. Hargreaves opened another packet drawn from the committee case. Inside lay invoices for high-grade black wool, purchased after each Thistle and Thread shipment had arrived short. The weights did not merely resemble the missing amounts, they matched them within ounces. Agnes placed the Brackenmere dispatch ledger beside the committee accounts. First shortage, £17. Committee purchase, £16, 12 ounces. Second shortage, £14. Committee purchase, £13, 10 ounces. Martha added the Bradford Spinners batch records. Each skein had carried a narrow blue tie under the outer wrap and a pressed mill mark near the knot. Those same marks appeared on 2 Wexham committee samples. This is the wool taken from our bales, she said. Lavinia looked at the yarn without touching it. A common mill mark proves only common supply. Not with matching invoice dates, matching weights, and the same irregular 7th turn in the twist, Honora replied. No single detail proves the theft. Together they show where the wool travelled. Ambrose's attorney whispered urgently to him. Ambrose ignored the advice. Lady Lavinia arranged the purchases. I was concerned only with securing repayment of lawful debts. Lavinia's composure thinned. You arranged the warehouse and the dye because your committee required discreet storage. I required discretion, not fraud. Your instruction was to ensure Lady Honora could not fulfill the commission under her own mark by purchasing the pattern and labour. You paid the workers to leave before the shawl was complete. At your suggestion, the magistrate struck the table once with his knuckles. Enough. The outburst had not become a confession. It had become something more believable. Each villain now insisted the other had crossed the line first. The documents between them made retreat impossible. Honora felt no triumph yet, only pressure easing from the truth. Lady Wexham stepped closer to the committee books. Did my charitable funds purchase stolen wool? She asked. Lavinia's face tightened. My lady, the committee acted through agents. That was not my question. The funds were advanced for mourning production, using a concern you intended to discredit. Lavinia did not answer. Lady Wexham turned to the committee secretary. Remove Lady Lavinia's authority from every account until the inquiry concludes. The secretary bowed. Yes, my lady, and prepare a public correction. It will state that the shawl worn at the memorial was not made at Brackenmere, and that the committee receiving rooms failed to preserve custody. Lavinia's voice sharpened. You cannot condemn me before formal proceedings. I am not condemning you, Lady Wexham said. I am correcting my own name before you use it again. The words landed without raised volume. No applause followed. None was needed. Mr. Hargreaves turned next to the Harcourt records. The North Vale transport agreement had been filed beneath a freight concession bearing Sebastian's crest, an intermediary signature. Connected the arrangement to Ambrose's clerk. Another page showed that the carriage used in London had been exempted from a second inspection because it travelled under ducal privilege. Sebastian read the entry and closed his eyes for one brief second. "Suspend the concession," he said. One railway director who had arrived with the inspector looked startled. "Your Grace, the Parliamentary Committee reviews your reform measure next month. Then it will review a measure written with the failure included. The suspension may be used against you. It should be." Sebastian placed the account book on the table. House Harcourt failed to supervise a privilege others trusted. That failure made concealment easier. Ambrose gave a bitter smile, a noble admission, now that Lady Honora is likely to prevail. Sebastian looked at him. No, a late one. Then he turned toward Honora. The hall seemed to narrow again, though dozens of witnesses remained. "I also offered to preserve Thistle Thread by taking authority from the woman who built it. I called that protection because the word acquisition would have sounded uglier." Honora did not move. Sebastian continued. "I believed capital entitled me to control the risk. I was wrong. Employment without ownership would have left Lady Honora visible and powerless." The York correspondent's pencil moved quickly. Sebastian did not look at him. "Any agreement offered by House Harcourt from this day forward will recognize her sole authority over the concern." The admission did not ask forgiveness. It did not place romance above accountability. That was why it reached her. Honora allowed herself one breath before returning to the table. "The workers' losses must be calculated," she said. "Every hour spent correcting sabotaged goods. Every approved piece returned because of false accusation. Every promised advance used to lure finishers away." Ambrose's attorney objected. "These matters have not yet been adjudicated." "Then record them as claims against recovered funds," the magistrate said. "The formal proceedings will determine liability." Honora nodded. Eliza Vane's debt notes must remain under review. They were used to compel the lease. Eliza looked up from beside the solicitor. "I will repay anything lawfully owed, and testify to everything you did," Honora said. "Yes." "Then your daughter's cottage should not be seized before the court decides whether the debt itself was used fraudulently." The solicitor confirmed the protection would hold. Honora turned to the creditors. Thistle Thread's goods were undervalued because fine wool was removed and orders were returned under false claims. Recovered stock and restitution alter the account on which the receiver petition was based. The principal creditor conferred with his clerk. "We will suspend the petition for 14 days, provide the recovered goods remain inventoried and current wages are not concealed." "They have never been concealed," Agnes said. Her voice was quiet, but the correction carried. Honora looked at her. "Miss Reed will continue as managing clerk. All accounts remain open to contracted workers and creditors under proper notice." Martha's stood beside the inspected bales. "And the workrooms?" the York merchant asked. "Supervised by Mrs. Keene," Honora said. Martha's head lifted. "With authority to reject unfit yarn and stop production when standards fail." "Under whose final approval?" he asked. Honora met his gaze. "Mine." The answer required no explanation. Lady Wexham touched the stained gown lying across the evidence table. "I will place a new commission," she said. "One mourning shawl, made at Brackenmere, delivered directly to my house and inspected at both departure and receipt." Lavinia stared at her. Lady Wexham continued. The invoice will name every maker whose hands touched it. Mrs. Pritchard, standing near the workers at the rear of the hall, covered her mouth. Martha did not. She looked straight at Honora, and, for the first time, no suspicion stood between them. 2 York merchants withdrew their immediate claims and asked to review non-exclusive distribution terms. Honora refused exclusivity before they finished the sentence. Agnes drafted the agreement. Patterns remained with Thistle Thread. Suppliers required recorded weights. No merchant could control wages. The men hesitated, then accepted. Honora signed last. Lady Honora Fenwick, sole proprietress. The station clock struck midnight as she put down the pen. The creditors did not seize the bales. The railway men did not move the evidence. Lavinia left under Lady Wexham's order without the committee books. Ambrose remained with his attorney, while the magistrate's clerk secured the debt papers, warehouse records, and payment authorizations for formal proceedings. The old brass die lay sealed in its box beside Lady Margaret's NYR 417 disc. One had opened the theft. The other had preserved its scar. Sebastian approached only after the merchants withdrew. "Your contracts are secure for now," he said. "For now" is an honest phrase. I am learning several. Honora looked toward the workers gathering the recovered wool. The workroom survives because they chose to stay, and because you allowed them to know the risk. You once thought knowing the risk gave you the right to control it. Yes, he accepted the sentence without defense. I do not anymore. The platform had begun to empty. Gaslight reflected from the wet rails beyond the doors. Honora could feel the exhaustion waiting for her, but not yet. "What happens to your railway measure?" she asked. "It may fail." "And your concession?" "Suspended until the inquiry ends." "You gave that up before knowing whether the evidence would clear me." "I opened it because the evidence might not clear me." Their eyes met. Honora remembered catching his sleeve in the warehouse. The gesture had been brief, almost nothing. Yet it had carried everything she had not been ready to say. "After the records are filed," Sebastian said, "may I come to Brackenmere?" "As an investor? No. As a rescuer? No." "Then why?" His humor did not appear. "Because I would like to know whether there is a place for me in a life I no longer intend to manage." Honora did not answer quickly. Around them, Martha checked the final bale. Agnes copied the scale record. Eliza signed her complete statement. Lady Wexham's ruined gown was folded for evidence, not hidden. Truth had not repaired everything. It had only made repair possible. "Come in daylight," Honora said. Sebastian inclined his head. "In daylight." Honora turned to the scale. The last recovered bale was lifted onto it. The needle settled exactly at the weight recorded before theft. Agnes entered the figure. Martha signed beneath it. Honora added her own name last. For the first time since she had awakened, beneath the sound of an auction hammer, no one else had written the value of what belonged to her. 8 months later, the first fully independent shipment from Brackenmere stood ready beneath a clear April sky. The old orangery windows shone with morning light, and the yard no longer carried the silence of an estate awaiting sale. Women crossed between the workroom and the loading table with invoices, wrapped collars, folded shawls, and inspected skeins. Every bale had been weighed before packing. Every parcel carried the name of the maker whose hands had completed it. Agnes Reed stood at the high desk near the door, no longer an unpaid companion, and no longer hidden behind someone else's authority. She served as managing clerk under a fixed annual salary and supervised 2 assistants who treated her instructions as final. Martha Keene directed the workrooms. Mrs. Pritchard trained women, whose hands required padded hooks, wider grips, or shorter stitching periods. Thistle and Thread now worked through 3 connected rooms. Brackenmere handled design and finishing. York managed packing and dispatch. A contracted room near Bradford trained new workers and inspected incoming yarn before it entered production. The growth had not come from sudden fortune. It had come from recovered wool, restitution, confirmed orders from Lady Wexham, and merchants who had learned that accurate weights were cheaper than scandal. Honora walked beside the loading table with Lady Wexham's completed shawl folded across her arms. The new piece was deep black, light over the shoulders, and bordered with a restrained pattern of mourning arches. Inside the wrapping lay an invoice naming every woman who had contributed. Mrs. Pritchard had completed the corners. Martha had approved the tension. Honora had worked the central wheel with Lady Margaret's bone hook. "Final weight?" she asked. Agnes checked the ledger. £5, 11 ounces with wrapping. It agrees with the workroom record. And the receiving house? Lady Wexham's steward will weigh it before opening. Good. Agnes closed the ledger. You have asked me that 3 times. Then you have answered correctly 3 times. A rare achievement before breakfast. Honora smiled and turned toward the yard. The legal proceedings had moved with less speed than gossip and more certainty than fear. A preliminary order had stripped Ambrose of authority over Brackenmere's commercial goods and required restitution from accounts connected to North Vale Transport. The debt notes used against Eliza Vane had been declared unenforceable because they had served as instruments of coercion. Eliza remained in her cottage with her daughter and continued to testify when summoned. She did not work at Brackenmere. Trust had not been restored so easily. Yet Honora had arranged no public punishment beyond the truth, and Eliza had accepted that consequence without protest. Lavinia had been removed from the Wexham Committee. A correction bearing her signature appeared in the York and London trade papers, stating that the shawl worn at the memorial had not been made by Thistle and Thread, and that the committee's receiving procedures had failed. Society still invited Lavinia to some houses. It did not trust her recommendations with the same ease. Honora considered that a more accurate punishment than exile. The sound of carriage wheels reached the yard. Martha looked toward the drive. "Daylight," she said. Honora felt the words before she saw the carriage. Sebastian stepped down without an escort of politicians, merchants, or curious friends. He carried a narrow leather case. His coat was dark, his expression composed, and the hesitation in his first step belonged to a man who understood that an invitation was not ownership. Honora waited beside the loading table. "Your Grace, Lady Honora." His gaze moved across the yard, the scales, the signed labels, and the women checking each parcel. "I see your concern has become more difficult to rescue. It has become impossible to rescue against its will. An encouraging improvement." He greeted Agnes and asked whether the York clerks had accepted the new double-entry weight record. He asked Martha how often yarn was rejected before production. He listened when Mrs. Pritchard explained that some women worked faster with shorter sessions and suffered fewer errors. He did not call the system charitable. He asked what it cost, whether it could be repeated, and who held authority when Honora was away. Only after the final bail had been sealed did he turn back to her. "May we speak in the morning room?" The damaged table still stood there, repaired across one corner rather than replaced. Honora had kept it because restoration was not the same as pretending damage had never occurred. Sebastian placed the leather case upon it, but did not open it at once. The Railway Committee approved the revised weighing requirement last week, he said. Every sealed commercial consignment on the North Yorkshire routes must now be recorded at departure and arrival by separate clerks. Your measure survived, barely, and the Harcourt concession restored under independent supervision. House Harcourt no longer grants inspection exemptions. That must have offended several important men, a pleasure I had previously underestimated. Honora looked at the case. You did not come only to discuss freight. No, he opened it and removed a marriage settlement. The pages were already marked by her solicitor. Honora read the first clause, then the second. Thistle Thread remained her separate property. House Harcourt acquired no automatic claim over its patterns, contracts, wages reserve, tools, or profits. Any investment required her written consent. Brackenmere's restored commercial assets could not be used to satisfy Harcourt debts. Her authority over managers and suppliers remained undivided. You consulted my solicitor, she said, repeatedly. Did he enjoy it? He enjoyed correcting me. That sounds like him. Sebastian rested one hand against the table. The first draft contained a trustee. Honora looked up. Whose? Mine. And now, your solicitor removed him with alarming efficiency. A wise man, a merciless one. She set the settlement down. Why now? Sebastian did not reach for humor. Because the accounts are secure. Because your workrooms can survive without my name. Because the inquiry has shown the difference between protection and control more clearly than I deserved. He took one breath. And because I love you. Honora had expected the sentence. She had not expected its quietness. What do you love? She asked. Not an idea, not a woman improved by suffering you. His gaze held hers. I love the way you demand the correct weight even when honesty costs you. I love that you admit harm without surrendering your dignity to the people who judge it. I love that you paid workers before creditors and refused to turn loyalty into debt. I love that you allowed me to stand beside you only after I learned not to move you. The room became very still. You make me sound severe, she said. You are severe, and yet you came. I have developed courage in disciplined quantities. A laugh escaped her before emotion could close her throat. Sebastian's expression softened. I am not asking for your enterprise. I am asking whether there is room for me in the life around it. Mornings at Brackenmere. Arguments over freight. Dinners where you tell me exactly which of my opinions are expensive. A marriage in which your name remains on every crate you wish it to remain on. Honora touched the bone hook at her waist. She removed it from its leather case and placed it in his open palm. Sebastian looked down at the pale, worn handle, then back at her. This belonged to my mother, she said. It made wages when no one powerful believed women's work was worth reading. I know. Holding it does not make it yours. No. Trust is not possession. I know. She took the hook back. His hand closed only after it had left his palm. Then yes, Honora said, with the terms. Relief changed his face more completely than triumph could have done. He held out his hand and waited. Honora placed hers in it. His fingers closed gently, no tighter than necessary. Their courtship continued openly through spring and summer. The wedding took place at Brackenmere's estate chapel before workers, tenants, Lady Wexham, Agnes Martha, Mrs. Pritchard, Mrs. Blythe, and the few relations who understood that marriage had joined two houses without swallowing either life. Months later, the first shipment sent under Honora's married name arrived at York Depot. The receiving clerk weighed every bale. Each figure matched the departure record. Inside the final crate lay good wool, completed work, and the names of the women who had been paid for it. Honora threaded a length of thistle-purple cotton through the new registered seal using Lady Margaret's bone hook, one loop, one clean knot. Then she broke the seal herself. Sebastian stood beside the open ledger and did not reach for the pen. Honora smiled, set the hook near the margin, and began the next record in her own hand.